Men and women who would as soon he had never returned to Carrion, some of them waving their arms and giving voice. He raised the dragon scepter to acknowledge them, and they roared louder. A thunderous roll of drums and a blare of trumpets rose through the cheers, produced by a dozen more of Bilbrain's men, who wore crimson tabards with the black and white disc on the chest, half carrying long trumpets draped in identical cloths, the other half with kettle drums also decorated, slung on either side of the horses. 5 Aes Sedai in their shawls came to meet him as he descended the broad stairs. At least, they glided toward him. Alana gave him one searching look with those big, dark, penetrating eyes. The tiny knot of emotions in his skull said she was calmer, more relaxed than he ever remembered. Then she made a small motion, and Min touched his arm and went aside with her. Vera and the others made small curtsies, inclining their heads slightly, as Aiel streamed out of the palace behind him. Nandera led 200 maidens. They were not about to be outshone by the Oathbreakers, and Kamar, a rangy, bent-peaked Darine, grayer than Nandera and half a head taller than Rand, led 200 Sayadun, who would not be outshone by Fardarai's Mai, let alone Tyrienin. They swung past on either side of him in the Aes Sedai to ring the courtyard. Vera, like a proud farm wife, and Alana, like some darkly beautiful queen in their green-fringed shawls, and plump Rathella, even darker wrapped in her blue, watching him anxiously, and cool-eyed Phaedron, yet another green, her thin braids worked with colored beads, and slim Marana in her gray, whose frown made Rathella seem a picture of Aes Sedai serenity. 5. Where are Karuna and Varen? He demanded. I called for all of you. So you did, my Lord Dragon, Vera answered smoothly. She made another curtsy, too. Only the slightest dip, but it took him aback. We could not find Varen. She is somewhere in the Aiel tents. Questioning the... Her smooth tone faltered for one instant. The prisoners, I believe, in an attempt to learn what was planned once they reached Tarvalin. Once he reached Tarvalin. She knew enough not to put that where anyone could hear. And Karuna is consulting with Soralia on a matter of protocol. But I'm quite certain she will be more than happy to join us if you send a personal summons to Soralia. I could go myself if you... He waved that away. 5 should be enough. Perhaps Varen could learn something. Did he want to know? And Karuna, a matter of protocol? I'm glad you are getting on with the wise ones. Vera started to speak, then closed her mouth firmly. Whatever Alana was saying to Min, scarlet spots had flared in Min's cheeks, and she had raised her chin, though oddly she seemed to be replying calmly enough. He wondered whether she would tell him. One thing he was sure of about women was that every last one had secret places in her heart, sometimes shared with another woman, but never with a man. The only thing he was sure of about women. I didn't come out here to stand all day, he said irritably. The Aes Sedai had arranged themselves with Vera in the lead, the others half a step back. If it had not been her, it would have been Karuna. Their own arrangements, not his. He did not really care so long as they held to their oaths, and he might have left it alone if not for Min and Alana. Marana will speak for you from now on. You will take your orders from her. By the suddenly widened eyes, you would have thought he had slapped every one of them, including Marana. Even Alana's head whipped around. Why should they be startled? True, Vera and Karuna had done almost all the talking since Dumai's Wells, but Marana had been the ambassador sent to him at Camelin. If you are ready, Min, he said, and without waiting for a reply, strode out into the courtyard. The big, fiery-eyed black gelding he had ridden back from Dumai's Wells had been brought out for him, with a high-cantled saddle all worked in gold, and a crimson saddlecloth embroidered with a disc of black and white at each corner. The trappings suited the animal, and his name. Taidashar, in the old tongue, Lord of Glory. Horse and trappings both suited the dragon reborn. As he mounted, Min led up the mouse-colored mare she had ridden back, snugging on her riding gloves before swinging into the saddle. "Sayer is a fine animal," she said, patting the mare's arched neck. "I wish she was here. I like her name, too. We call the flower a blue eye around Berlin, and they grow everywhere in the spring." "She's yours," Rand said. Whichever Aes Sedai the mare belonged to would not refuse to sell to him. He would give Karuna 1,000 crowns for Tatai Shar. She could not complain then. The finest stallion of Tyrant bloodstock never cost a tenth of that. "Did you have an interesting conversation with Alana?" "Nothing that would interest you," she said offhandedly. But a faint touch of red stained her cheeks. He snorted softly, then raised his voice. "Lord Dobrain, I've kept the sea folk waiting long enough, I think." The procession drew crowds along the broad avenues and filled the windows and rooftops as word raced ahead. 20 of Dobrain's lancers led to clear the way, along with 30 maidens and as many black eyes, then drummers booming away, drum, 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 drum. The trumpeters punctuating that with flourishes. Shouts from the onlookers nearly drowned drums and trumpets alike, a wordless roar that could have been rage as easily as approbation. The banners streamed out just ahead of Dobrain and behind Rand, the white dragon banner and the scarlet banner of the light, and veiled Aiel trotted alongside the lancers, whose streamers also floated in the air. Now and then, a few flowers were hurled at him. Maybe they did not hate him. Maybe they only feared. It had to do. "A train worthy of any king," Marana said loudly, to be heard. "Then it's enough for the dragon reborn," he replied sharply. "Will you stay back? And you too, Min." Other rooftops held assassins. The arrow or crossbow bolt meant for him would not find its target in a woman today. They did fall back behind his big black, for all of 3 paces, and then they were right beside him again, Min telling him what Berlin had written about the sea folk on the ships, about the Jendai prophecy and the Koromor, and Marana adding what she knew of the prophecy, though she admitted that was not very much, little more than Min. Watching the rooftops, he listened with half an ear. He did not hold Sayadin, but he could feel it in Dashiva and the other 2, right behind him. He did not feel the tingle that would announce the Aes Sedai embracing the source, but he had told them not to, without permission. Perhaps he should change that. They did seem to be keeping their own. How could they not? They were Aes Sedai. A fine thing if he took an assassin's blade while one of the sisters tried to decide whether serving meant saving him or obeying meant not channeling. "Why are you laughing?" Min wanted to know. Sayer pranced closer, and she smiled up at him. "This is no laughing matter, my Lord Dragon," Marana said acidly on the other side. "The Atharmier can be very particular. Any people grow fastidious when it comes to their prophecies." "The world is a laughing matter," he told her. Min laughed along with him, but Marana snipped and went right back to the sea folk as soon as he stopped. At the river, the high city wall ran out into the water, flanking long gray stone docks that stretched out from the quay.
It's rolling one up.
River ships and boats and barges of every kind and size were tied everywhere, the crews on deck to see the commotion, but the vessel Rand saw it stood ready and waiting, lashed end-on to the end of a dock where all the laborers had already been cleared off. A longboat, it was called, a low, narrow splinter without any masts, just one staff in the bow, 4 paces tall, topped by a lantern, and another at the stern. Nearly 30 paces in length and lined with as many long oars, it could not carry the cargo a sailing vessel the same size would, but it had no need of the wind either, and with a shallow draft, it could travel day and night, using rowers in shifts. Longboats ran the rivers with cargoes of importance and urgency. It had seemed appropriate. The captain bowed repeatedly as Rand came down the boarding ramp with Min on his arm and the Aes Sedai and Ashaman at his heels. Elver Shayna was even skinnier than his craft, in a yellow coat of Mirandian cut that hung to his knees.
All right.
"It's an honor to be carrying you, my Lord Dragon," he murmured, mopping his bald head with a large handkerchief. "An honor it is. An honor indeed. An honor." Plainly the man would rather have had his ship brimful of live vipers. He blinked at the Aes Sedai's shawls and stared at their ageless faces and licked his lips, eyes flickering back to Rand uneasily. The Ashaman dropped his mouth open once he put their black coats together with rumor. Thereafter, he avoided so much as a glance in their direction. Shayna watched Dobrain lead the men with the banners aboard, and the trumpeters and the drummers lugging their drums, then eyed the horsemen lining the dock as if he suspected they might want to board too. Nandera with 20 maidens and Kamara with 20 black eyes, all with shufa wrapped around their heads, though unveiled, made the captain step hastily to put the Aes Sedai between him and them. The Aiel wore scowls for the heartbeat that needing to veil might slow them, but the sea folk might well know what a veil meant, and it would hardly do for them to think they were under attack. Rand thought Shayna's handkerchief might yet rub away what thin gray fringe of hair he had left. The longboat swept away from the dock on its long oars, the two banners rippling in the bows, and the drums pounding and the trumpets blaring. Out in the river, people appeared on the decks of ships to watch, even climbed into the rigging. On the seafolk ship, they came out too, many in bright colors, unlike the drab clothing on crews of the other vessels. The White Spray was a larger craft than most of the rest, yet somehow sleeker as well, with two large masts raked back sharply, and spars laid across them squarely, where nearly all the other ships had slanting spars, longer than the masts, to hold most of their sails. Everything about it spoke of difference, but in one thing Rand knew, the Athon Mier had to be like everyone else. They could either agree to follow him on their own, or be forced to it. The prophecies said he would bind together the people of every land. The north shall be tied to the east, and the west shall be bound to the south, it said. And no one could be allowed to stand aside. He knew that now. Sending out orders from his bath, he had not had an opportunity to give details of what he intended on reaching White Spray, so he announced them now. The details produced grins among the Ashaman, as expected. Well, Finn and Narishma grinned, Teshiva blinked absently, and frowns among the Aiel, also as expected. They did not like being left behind. Dobrain merely nodded. He knew he was only here for show today. What Rand did not expect was the Aiel reaction. "It shall be as you command, my Lord Dragon," Marana said, making one of those small curtsies. The other four exchanged glances, but they were curtsying and murmuring "as you command" right behind her. Not one protest, not one frown, not a single haughty stare or recital of why it should be done any way but what he wanted. Could he begin to trust them? Or would they find some Aes Sedai way to wriggle around their oath as soon as his back was turned? "They will keep their word," Min murmured abruptly, just as if she had read his thoughts. With an arm wrapped around his and both hands holding his sleeve, she kept her voice for his ears alone. "I just saw these 5 in your hand," she added in case he did not understand. He was not sure he could fix his mind around that, even if she had seen it in a viewing. He did not have long to try. The longboat blew through the water, and in no time at all was backing oars some 20 paces from the much taller White Spray. Drums and trumpets fell silent, and Rand channeled, making a bridge of air laced with fire that connected the longboat's railing to that of the seafolk ship. With Min on his arm, he started to cross, to every eye but that of the Nashaman, walking upward on nothing. He half expected Min to falter, at least at first, but she simply walked at his side, as though there were stone beneath her green-heeled boots. "I trust you," she said quietly. She smiled, too, partly a comforting smile, and partly, he thought, because she was amused at reading his mind once more. He wondered how much she would trust if she knew that this was as far as he could weave a bridge like this. One pace farther, 1 foot, and the whole thing would have given way at the first step. At that point, it became like trying to lift yourself with the power, an impossibility. Even the Forsaken did not know why, any more than they knew why a woman could make a longer bridge than a man, even if she was not as strong. It was not a matter of weight. Any amount of weight could cross any bridge. Just short of White Spray's railing, he stopped, standing in midair. For all Marana's descriptions, the people staring back at him were a shock. Dark women and bare-chested men with colorful slashes that dangled to the knee, and gold or silver chains around their necks and rings in their ears, in their noses of all places on some of the women, who wore rainbow blouses above their dark baggy breeches. None had any more expression than an Aes Sedai who was trying hard. 4 of the women, despite being barefoot like the rest, wore bright silks, 2 of them brocades, and they had more necklaces and earrings than anyone else as well, with a chain strung with gold medallions running from an earring to a ring in the side of the nose. They said nothing, only stood together watching him, sniffing at small lacy golden boxes that hung from chains around their necks. He addressed himself to them. "I am the Dragon Reborn. I am the Coromor." A collective sigh ran through the crew, not among the 4 women, though. "I am Areen Din Togara Two Winds, Wave Mistress to Clan Showtime," announced the one with the most earrings, a handsome, full-mouthed woman in red brocade, wearing 5 fat little gold rings in each ear. There were white bits through her straight black hair, and fine lines at the corners of her eyes. She had an impressive dignity. "I speak here for the mistress of the ships. If it pleases the light, the Coromor may come aboard." For some reason she gave a start, and so did the 3 with her. That sounded entirely too much like permission. Rand stepped onto the deck with men wishing he had not waited. He let the bridge go, and Saidin, but immediately felt another bridge replace it. In short order, the Ashaman and the Aes Sedai were with him, the sisters no more flustered than Min had been, though perhaps 1 or 2 did straighten their skirts a bit more than necessary. They were still not so easy around the Ashaman as they pretended. The 4 Seafolk women took one look at the Aes Sedai and immediately gathered in a close huddle, whispering. Areen did a lot of the talking, and so did a young pretty woman in green brocade with 8 earrings altogether, but the pair in plain silk put in occasional comments. Marana coughed delicately and spoke softly into the hand she used to cover it. "I heard her name you the Coromor. The Atha'an Mi'er are great bargainers, I've heard, but I think she gave away something then." Nodding, Rand glanced down at Min. She was squinting at the Seafolk women, but as soon as she noticed his look, she shook her head ruefully. She saw nothing yet that might help him. Areen turned so calmly there might never have been any hasty conference. "This is Shallan Din Togara Morningtide, Windfinder to Clan Showtime," she said with a small bow toward the woman in green brocade. "And this is Dera Din Salan Rising Wave, Sail Mistress of White Spray." Each woman bowed slightly as she was named, and touched fingers to her lips. Dara, a handsome woman a little short of her middle years, wore plain blue and also 8 earrings, though her earrings, nose ring, and the chain that ran between was finer than Hareen's or Shallan's. "The welcome of my ship to you," Dara said, "and the grace of the light be upon you until you leave his decks." She made a small bow toward the 4th woman in yellow. "This is Tavel Din Chennai Nine Gulls, Windfinder of White Spray." Only 3 rings hung from each of Tavel's ears, fine, like those of the sailmistress. She looked younger than Shallan, no older than himself. Areen took it up again, gesturing toward the raised stern of the ship. "We will speak in my cabin if it pleases you. A Sorer is not a large vessel, Randall Thor, and the cabin is small. If it pleases you to come alone, all here stand surety for your safety." So, from the Coromor to plain Randall Thor, she would take back what she had given, if she could. He was about to open his mouth and agree, anything to get this done. Areen was already moving that way, still gesturing for him to follow, the other woman with her, when Marana gave another tiny cough. The Windfinders can channel, she murmured hastily into her hand. You should take 2 sisters with you, or they'll feel they've gained the upper hand. Rand frowned. The upper hand? He was the Dragon Reborn, after all. Still, I will be pleased to accommodate, mistress, but Min here goes everywhere with me. After Min's hand on his arm, he did not let go an instant, and Irene nodded. Topple was already holding the door open. Dara made one of those small bows, gesturing him toward it. And Shiva, please. The man gave a start at his name, as if he had been asleep. At least he was not staring wide-eyed around the deck like Flynn and Narishma. Staring at the women.
A little bit of it does.
Stories spoke of the alluring beauty and grace of seafolk women, and Rand could certainly see that. They walked as if they would begin dancing on the next step, swaying sinuously. But he had not brought the men here to ogle. Keep your eyes open, he told them harshly. Narishma colored, jerking himself stiffly erect, and pressed fist to chest. Flynn simply saluted, but both seemed more alert. For some reason, Min looked up at him with the tiniest wry smile. Irene nodded a little more impatiently. A man stepped out from the crew in baggy green silk breeches, with an ivory-hilted sword and dagger thrust behind his sash. More white-haired than she, he also wore 5 fat little rings in each ear. She waved him away even more impatiently. As it please you, Rand al'Thor, she said. And of course, Rand added, as though an afterthought, I must have Marana and Rathella. He was not certain why he chose the second name. Perhaps because the plump tyrant sister was the only one not green, except Marana. But to his surprise, Marana smiled in approval. For that matter, Bera nodded, and so did Phaedron and Alana. Irene did not approve. Her mouth tightened before she could control it. As it pleases you, she said, not quite so pleasantly as before. Once he was inside the stern cabin, where everything except a few brass-bound chests seemed built into the walls, Rand was not so sure the woman had not gained whatever she wanted just bringing him there. For one thing, he was forced to stand hunched over, even between the roof beams, or whatever they were called on a ship. He had read several books about ships, but none mentioned that. The chair he was offered at the foot of the narrow table would not pull out, being fastened to the deck. Once Min showed him how to unlatch the chair arm and swing it out so he could sit, his knees hit the bottom of the table. There were only 8 chairs. Irene sat at the far end, her back to the stern's red-shuttered windows, with her windfinder to her left, and the sailmistress to her right, and Topple below her. Marana and Rathella took the chairs below Shallan, while Min sat to Rand's left. Shiva, with no chair, took a place beside the door, standing upright quite easily, though the roof beams almost brushed his head too. A young woman in a bright blue blouse, with one thin earring in each ear, brought thick cups of tea, brewed black and bitter. Let's be done with this, Rand said testily as soon as the woman left with her tray. He left his cup on the table after one sip.
That's when you know you got a good one.
He could not stretch out his legs. He hated being confined. Thoughts of being doubled inside the chest flashed in his head, and it was all he could do to rein his temper. The stone of Tyr has fallen. The Aiel have come over the dragon wall. All the parts of your Jendai prophecy have come to pass. I am the Koramur. Irene smiled across her cup, a cool smile with no amusement in it. That may be so, as it pleases the light, but it is so, Rand snapped, despite a warning glance from Marana. She went so far as to nudge his leg with her foot. He ignored that, too. The cabin walls seemed closer somehow. What is it that you don't believe, Wave Mistress? That Aes Sedai serve me? Rathella, Marana, he gestured sharply. All he wanted was for them to come to him, and be seen to come, but they set down their cups and rose gracefully, glided to either side of him, and knelt. Each took one of his hands in both of hers, and pressed her lips to the back of it, right on the shining golden-maned head of the dragon that wound around his forearm. He just managed to conceal his shock, not taking his eyes from Hareen. Her face went a little gray. Aes Sedai serve me, and so will the sea folk. He motioned the sisters back to their seats. Oddly, they looked a touch surprised. That is what the Jedi prophecy says. The sea folk will serve the Koramur. I am the Koramur. Yes, but there is the matter of the bargain. That word was plainly capitalized in Hareen's tone. The Jedi prophecy says you will bring us to glory, and all the seas of the world will be ours. As we give to you, you must give to us. If I do not make the bargain well, Nesta will hang me naked in the rigging by my ankles and call the first 12 of Clan Shodine to name a new wave mistress. A look of utter horror stole across her face as those words came out of her mouth, and her black eyes went wider and wider by the word with disbelief. Her wavefinder goggled at her, and Dara and Tubble tried so hard not to, their eyes fastened to the table, that it seemed their faces might break. And suddenly Rand understood. ta'veren. He had seen the effects, the sudden moments when the least likely thing happened because he was near, but he had never known what was going on before until it was finished. Easing his legs as best he could, he leaned his arms on the table. The Athaan Mier will serve me, Hareen. That is given.
Bird dab.
Yes, we will serve you, but... Hareen half reared out her chair, spilling her tea. What are you doing to me, Aes Sedai? She cried, trembling. This is not fair bargaining. We do nothing, Marana said calmly. She actually managed to drink a swallow of that tea without wincing. You are in the presence of the dragon reborn, Rafael added. The Koramur your prophecy calls you to serve. He laid a finger to one round cheek. You said you speak for the mistress of the ships. Does that mean your word is binding on the Athaan Mier? Yes, Hareen whispered hoarsely, falling back in her seat. What I say binds every ship and all to the mistress of the ships herself. It was impossible for one of the two folk to go white in the face, yet staring at Rand, she came as near as she could. He smiled at Min to share the moment. At last a people would come to him without fighting every step of the way, or splitting apart like the Aiel. Maybe Min thought he wanted her to help clinch matters, or maybe it was ta'veren. She leaned toward the wave mistress. You will be punished for what happens here today, Hareen, but not so much as you fear, I think. At least, one day you will be the mistress of the ships. Hareen frowned at her, then glanced to her windbinder. She is not Aes Sedai, Shallan said, and Hareen seemed caught between relief and disappointment, until Rafaela spoke. Several years ago, I heard reports of a girl with a remarkable ability to see things. Are you she, Min? Min grimaced into her cup, then nodded reluctantly. She always said that the more people knew what she could do, the less good came of it. Glancing across the table at the Aes Sedai, she sighed. Rafaela only nodded, but Marana was staring at her, hazel eyes avid in a mask of serenity. No doubt she expected to call in as soon as possible and find out what this talent was and how it worked, and no doubt Min expected it too.
That was a good one there.
Rand felt a prickle of irritation. He should have known he would protect her from being bothered. A prickle of irritation and a warmth that he could protect her from that, at least. You may trust what Min says, Hareen, Rafaela said. The reports I heard say that what she sees always seems to come true. And even if she doesn't realize it, she has seen something else. Her round face tilted to one side, and a smile curved her mouth. If you will be punished for what happens here, then it must mean you will agree to whatever your Koramur wants. Unless I agree to nothing, Hareen blustered. If I make no bargain... Her fists clenched on the tabletop. She had already admitted she had to make the bargain. She had admitted the sea folk would serve. What I require of you is not onerous, Rand said. He had thought about this since deciding to come. When I want ships to carry men or supplies, the sea folk will give them. I want to know what is happening in Taraban and Aradaman, and in the lands between. Your ships will learn, what I want to know. They call in Tanchico and Bandar Eben, and 100 fishing villages and towns between. Your ship can travel farther out to sea than anyone else's. The sea folk will keep watch as far west in the Arth Ocean as they can sail. There is a people, the Shonchan, who live beyond the Arth Ocean, and one day they will come to try to conquer us. The sea folk will let me know when they come. You require much, Irene muttered bitterly. We know of these Shonchan, who come from the islands of the dead, it seems, from which no ship returns. Some of our ships have encountered theirs. They use the One Power as a weapon. You require more than you know, Koramur. For once, she did not pause at the title. Some dark evil has descended upon the Arth Ocean. No ship of ours has come from there in many months. Ships that sail west vanish. Rand felt a chill. He turned the dragon scepter, made from part of a Shonchan spear, in his hands. Could they have returned already? They had been driven back once at Falmouth. He carried the spearhead to remind him that there were more enemies in the world than those he could see. But he had been sure it would take the Shonchan years to recover from their defeat, driven into the sea by the Dragon Reborn and the dead heroes called back by the Horn of Valir. Was the horn still in the White Tower? He knew it had been taken there. Suddenly, he could not bear the confines of the cabin any longer. He fumbled with the latch on the chair arm. It would not open. Gripping the smooth wood, he tore the arm off in splinters with one convulsive heave. We've agreed the sea folk will serve me, he said, pushing himself up. The low ceiling made him hunch over the table threateningly. The cabin did feel smaller. If there is any more to your bargain, Mirana and Rafaela here will see to it with you. Without waiting for an answer, he spun for the door, where Deshiva appeared to be muttering to himself again. Mirana caught him there, caught his sleeve, and spoke swiftly and low. My Lord Dragon, it would be for the best if you remained. You have seen what your being Taviran has done already. With you here, I believe she will continue to reveal what she wants to hide and give agreement before we give anything. You are Grey Aja, he told her harshly. Negotiate. Deshiva, come with me. On deck, he drew deep breaths. The cloudless sky was open overhead. Open. It took him a moment to notice Bera and the other two sisters watching him expectantly. Flynn and Narishma kept to what they were supposed to do, a quarter of an eye on the ship, and the rest on the riverbanks, the city on one side, and the half-rebuilt granaries on the other. A ship in mid-river was a vulnerable place to be if one of the Forsaken decided to strike. For that matter, anywhere was a dangerous place then. Rand could not understand why one of them had not at least tried to destroy the Sun Palace around his ears. Min took his arm, and he gave a start. I'm sorry, he said. I shouldn't have left you. That's all right, she laughed. Mirana is already setting to work. I think she means to get you Harin's best blouse, and maybe her second best as well. The Wave Mistress looks like a rabbit caught between two ferrets. Rand nodded. The sea folk were his, or as good as. What matter whether the Horn of Valir was in the White Tower? He was Taviran. He was the Dragon Reborn in the Koramur. The golden sun still burned well short of its noon peak. The day is young yet, men. He could do anything. Would you like to see me settle the rebels? 1,000 crowns to a kiss, they're mine before sunset.
Chapter 35. Into the Woods. Sitting cross-legged on Rand's bed, men watched him in his shirt sleeves rooting through the coats in the huge ivory-inlaid wardrobe. How could he sleep in this room with all its black, heavy furniture? A part of her thought absently about moving everything out, replacing it with some carved pieces she had seen in Camelin, lightly touched with gilding, and pale draperies and linens that he would find less oppressive. Odd. She had never cared one way or another about furniture or linens. but that one tapestry of a battle, of a lone swordsman surrounded by enemies and about to be overwhelmed, that definitely had to go. Mostly, though, she just watched him. There was such an intent look in his morning blue eyes, and the snowy shirt tightened across the broad of his back when he turned to reach deep into the wardrobe's interior. He had very good legs and marvelous calves, shown off well in dark, close-fitting breeches, with his boots turned down. Sometimes he frowned, combing fingers through dark reddish hair. No amount of brushing could make it ruly. It always curled slightly around his ears and on the nape of his neck. She was not one of those fool women who toss their brains at a man's feet along with their hearts. It was just that sometimes near him, thinking clearly became a trifle difficult. That was all. Coat after embroidered silk coat came out and was tossed to the floor, atop the one he had worn to the Seafolk ship. Could the negotiations still be going half so well without his Taviran presence? If only she had a really useful viewing of the Seafolk. As always, to her eyes, images and colorful auras flickered around him, most gone too quickly to make out, all but one meaningless to her at the moment. That one viewing came and went 100 times a day, and whenever Matt or Perrin were present, it encompassed them too, and sometimes others. A vast shadow lurked over him, swallowing up thousands upon thousands of tiny lights like fireflies that hurled themselves into it in an attempt to fill up the darkness. Today there seemed to be countless tens of thousands of fireflies, but the shadow seemed larger too. Somehow that viewing represented his battle with the shadow, but he almost never wanted to know how it stood. Not that she could really say, except that the shadow always seemed to be winning to one degree or another. She sighed with relief to see the image go. A tiny stab of guilt made her shift her seat on the coverlet. She had not really lied when he asked what viewings she had kept back. Not really. What good to tell him he would almost certainly fail without a woman who was dead and gone? He became bleak too easily as it was. She had to keep his spirits up, make him remember to laugh. Except, I don't think this is a good idea, Rand. Saying that might be a mistake. Men were strange creatures in so many ways. One minute they took reasonable advice, and the next did just the opposite. Deliberately did the opposite, it seemed. For some reason, though, she felt protective toward this towering man who could probably lift her with either hand, and that without his channeling. "It is a wonderful idea," he said, tossing down a blue coat with silver embroidery. "I'm Taviran, and today it seems to be working in my favor for a change." A green coat with gold embroidery went to the floor. "Wouldn't you rather comfort me again?" He stopped dead, staring at her with a silver-worked red coat hanging forgotten in his hands. She hoped she was not blushing. Comforting? Where did that idea ever come from? She wondered silently. The aunts who had raised her were gentle, kind women, but they had strong notions of proper behavior. They had disapproved of her wearing breeches, disapproved of her working in stables, the job she loved best, since it brought her into contact with horses. There was no question what they would think of comforting with a man she was not married to. If they ever found out, they would ride all the way from Bearlawn just to skin her, and him too, of course. "I need to keep moving while I'm sure it is still working," he said slowly, then turned quite quickly back to the wardrobe. "This will do," he exclaimed, pulling out a plain coat of green wool. "I didn't know this was in there." It was the coat he had worn coming back from Dumai's wells, and she could see his hands tremble as he remembered. Trying to be casual, she got up and went to put her arms around him, crushing the coat between them as she laid her head against his chest. "I love you," was all she said. Through his shirt, she could feel the round, half-healed scar on his left side. She could recall when he got it as if it were yesterday. That had been the first time she ever held him in her arms, while he lay unconscious and near death. His hands pressed against her back, squeezing her tight, squeezing the breath out of her, but then, disappointingly, they fell away. She thought he muttered something about not fair under his breath. Was he thinking about the sea folk while she hugged him? He should be, really. Marana was a gray, yet it was said the sea folk could make a Domani sweat. He should be, but she thought about kicking his ankle. Gently, he moved her away and began pulling on the coat. Rand, she said firmly, you can't be sure it will have any effect, just because it did on Hareen. If you being Taviran always affected everything, you'd have every ruler kneeling at your feet by now, and the white cloaks too. I'm the dragon reborn, he replied haughtily, and today I can do anything. Scooping up his sword belt, he fastened it around his waist. It bore a plain brass buckle now. The gilded dragon lay atop the coverlet on the bed. Gloves of thin black leather went on to cover the gold-maned heads on the back of his hands, and the herons branded on his palms. But I don't look like him, do I? He spread his arms, smiling. They won't know until it's too late. She almost threw up her hands. You don't look much like a fool either. And let him take that how he would. The idiot eyed her askance, as if he was not sure. Rand, as soon as they see the Aiel, they will either run or start fighting. If you won't take any of the Aes Sedai, at least take those Ashaman. One arrow and you're dead, whether you're the dragon reborn or a goat herd. But I am the dragon reborn, Min, he said seriously, and Taviran. We are going alone, just you and me. That is, if you still want to come. You're not going anywhere without me, Rand al'Thor. She stopped herself from saying he would trip over his own feet if he did. This euphoria was almost as bad as the dark bleakness. Nandera won't like this. She did not know exactly what went on between him and the maidens. Something very peculiar indeed by the things she had seen, but any hope that that might stop him guttered out when he grinned like a small boy evading his mother. She won't know, Min. He even had a twinkle in his eye. I do this all the time, and they never know. He held out a gloved hand, expecting her to jump when he called. There really was nothing to do but straighten her green coat, glance into the stand mirror to make sure of her hair, and take his hand. The trouble was, she was ready to leap if he crooked a finger. She just wanted to make sure he never found out.
Be right back.
In the anteroom, he made a gateway atop the golden rising sun set in the floor, and she let him lead her through onto a hilly forest floor carpeted with dead leaves. A bird flashed away, flaring red wings. A squirrel appeared on a branch and chittered at them, lashing a furry white-tipped tail. It was hardly the sort of woods she remembered from near Bear Lawn. There were not many real forests anywhere close to the city of Kyrian. Most of the trees stood 4 or 5 or even 10 paces apart. Tall leather leaves and pines, taller oaks, and trees she did not know, running across the flat she and Rand stood on, and up a slope that began only a few spans off. Even the undergrowth seemed thinner than back home. The bushes and vines and briars spread out in patches, though some of those were not small. Everything was brown and dry. She plucked the lace-edged handkerchief from her sleeve and dabbed at the sweat that suddenly seemed to pop out on her face. "Which way do we go?" she asked. By the sun, north lay over the slope, the direction she would choose. The city should lie about 7 or 8 miles in that direction. With luck, they could walk all the way back without encountering anyone. Or better, given her heeled boots and the terrain, not to mention the heat, Rand could decide to give up and make another gateway back to the Sun Palace. The palace rooms were cool compared to this. Before he could answer, crackling brush and leaves announced someone coming. The rider who appeared on a long-legged gray gelding with bright-fringed bridle and reins was a Kyrian woman, short and slender in a dark blue, nearly black silk riding dress, horizontal slashes of red and green and white running from her neck to below her knees. The sweat on her face could not diminish her pale beauty or make her eyes less than large, dark pools. A small, clear green stone hung on her forehead from a fine golden chain, fastened in black hair that fell in waves to her shoulders. Min gasped, and not for the hunting crossbow the woman carried, casually raised in one green-gloved hand. For a moment she was sure it was Moiraine. But I do not recall seeing either of you in the camp, the woman said in a throaty, almost sultry voice. Moiraine's voice had been crystal. The crossbow lowered, still quite casually, until it pointed rock-steady at Rand's chest. He ignored it. I thought I might like to take a look at your camp, he said with a slight bow. I believe you are the Lady Caroline Damodred? The slender woman inclined her head, acknowledging the name. Min sighed regretfully, but it was not as if she had really expected Moiraine to turn up alive. Moiraine was the only viewing of hers that had ever failed. But Caroline Damodred herself, one of the leaders of the rebellion against Rand here in Cairhien and a claimant to the Sun Throne, he really was pulling all the threads of the pattern around him to have her appear. Lady Caroline slowly raised the crossbow to one side. The cord made a loud snap, launching the broadhead bolt into the air. I doubt one would do any good against you, she said, walking her gelding slowly toward them, and I would not like you to think I was threatening you. She looked once at Min, just a glance that ran head to toe, though Min was sure everything about her was filed away. But aside from that, Lady Caroline kept her eyes on Rand. She drew rein 3 paces away, just far enough so he could not reach her a foot before she could dig in her heels. I can only think of one gray-eyed man with your height who might suddenly appear out of nowhere, unless perhaps you are an Aiel in disguise. But perhaps you will be so kind as to supply a name. I'm the Dragon Reborn, Rand said, every bit as arrogant as he had been with the sea folk. Yet if any Taviran swirling of the pattern was at work, the woman on the horse gave no evidence. Rather than leaping down to fall to her knees, she merely nodded, pursing her lips. I have heard so very much about you. I have heard you went to the tower to submit to the Amerlin Seed. I have heard you mean to give the Sun Throne to Elaine Trakand. I have also heard that you killed Elaine and her mother. I submit to no one, Rand replied sharply. He stared up at her with eyes fierce enough to snatch her out of the saddle by themselves. Elaine is on her way to Caemlyn as we speak, to take the throne of Andor, after which she will have the throne of Cairhien as well. Min winced. Did he have to sound like a pillow stuffed full of haughty? She had hoped he had calmed down a bit after the sea folk. Lady Caroline laid her crossbow across the saddle in front of her, running a gloved hand along it, perhaps regretting that loosed bolt. I could accept my young cousin on the throne. Better she than some, at least. But those big dark eyes that had seemed so liquid suddenly became stone. But I am not sure I can accept you in Cairhien. And I do not mean only your changes to laws and customs. You change fate by your very presence. Every day since you came, people die in accidents so bizarre no one can believe them. So many husbands abandon their wives and wives their husbands that no one even comments upon it now. You will tear Cairhien apart just by remaining here. Balance, Min broke in hastily. Rand's face was so dark he looked ready to burst. Maybe he had been right to come after all. Certainly there was no point letting him throw this meeting away in a tantrum. She gave no one a chance to speak. There is always a balance of good against bad. That's how the pattern works. Even he doesn't change that. As night balances day, good balances harm. Since he came, there hasn't been a single stillbirth in the city, not one child born deformed. There are more marriages some days than used to be in a week, and for every man who chokes to death on a feather, a woman tumbles head over heels down 3 flights of stairs, and instead of breaking her neck, stands up without a bruise. Name the evil and you can point to the good. The turning of the wheel requires balance, and he only increases the chances of what might have happened anyway in nature. Suddenly she colored, realizing they were both looking at her, staring more like. "Balance," Rand murmured, eyebrows lifting. "I've been reading some of Master Fell's books," she said faintly. She did not want anyone to think she was pretending to be a philosopher. Lady Caroline smiled at her tall saddle bow and toyed with her reins. The woman was laughing at her. She would show this woman what she could laugh at. Abruptly, a tall black gelding with the look of a warhorse came crashing through the undergrowth, ridden by a man well into his middle years, with close-cropped hair and a pointed beard. Despite his yellow Tyran coat, the fat sleeves striped with green satin, eyes of a startling pretty blue looked out of his damp dark face like pale polished sapphires. Not a particularly pretty man, but those eyes made up for a too long nose. He carried a crossbow in one leather gauntleted hand and brandished a broadhead bolt in the other. "This came down inches from my face, Caroline, and it has your markings. Just because there's no game is no reason." He became aware of Rand and Min just then, and his drawn crossbow lowered toward them. "Are these strays, Caroline? Or did you find spies from the city? I've never believed Al Thor would continue to let us sit here unhindered." Half a dozen more riders appeared behind him, sweating men in fat-sleeved coats with satin stripes and perspiring women in riding dresses with wide, thick lace collars, all carrying crossbows. The last of those riders had not halted, horses stamping and tossing heads, before twice as many came struggling through the brush from another direction and pulled up near Caroline. Slight, pale men and women in dark clothes with stripes of color, sometimes to below the waist, all with crossbows. Servants afoot came after, laboring and panting with the heat, the men who would dress and carry any downed game. It hardly seemed to matter that none had more than a skinning knife at his belt. Min swallowed, and unconsciously began patting her cheeks with her handkerchief a little more vigorously. If even one person recognized Rand before he knew it. Lady Caroline did not hesitate. "Not spies, darling," she said, turning her horse to face the Tyran newcomers. The High Lord Darlin Cisnera. All that was needed now was Lord Toram Riotin. Min wished Rand's Taviran tugging at the pattern could be just a little less complete. "A cousin and his wife," Caroline went on, "come from Andor to see me. May I present Tomas Trakand, from a minor branch of the house, and his wife, Jaisi." Min almost glared at her. The only Jaisi she had ever known had been a dusty prune before she was 20, and sour and bad-tempered to boot. Darlin's gaze swept over Rand again, lingered a moment on Min. He lowered his crossbow and bowed his head just a hair, a high lord of Tyr to a minor noble. "You are welcome, Lord Tomas. It takes a brave man to join us in our present circumstances. Al Thor may loose the savages on us any day." The Lady Caroline gave him an exasperated look that he made a show of not seeing. He noted that Rand's return bow was no more than his, however, noted and frowned. A darkly handsome woman in his retinue muttered angrily under her breath. She had a long, hard face, well practiced in anger, and a stout fellow, scowling and sweating in a red-striped coat of pale green, heeled his horse forward a few steps as if thinking to ride Rand down. "The wheel weaves as the wheel wills," Rand said coolly, as though he noticed nothing. The dragon reborn to just about anybody was what it was. Arrogance on a mountaintop. Not much happens as we expect. For instance, I heard you were in Tyr, in Haddon Merk." Min wished she dared speak up, dared say something to soothe him. She settled for stroking his arm, casually. A wife. Now there was a word that suddenly sounded fine. A wife idly patting her husband. Another fine word. Light, it was hard being fair. It was hardly fair having to be fair. "The High Lord Darlin is but lately come by longboat with a few of his close friends, Tomas. Caroline's throaty tone never changed, but her gelding suddenly pranced, no doubt at a sharp heel, and under cover of regaining control, she turned her back to Darlin and shot Rand a brief warning frown. "Do not trouble the High Lord, Thomas." "I do not mind, Caroline," Darlin said, slinging his crossbow from his saddle by a loop. He rode a little closer and rested an arm on his tall saddle-bow. "A man should know what he is stepping into. You may have heard the tales about Althor going to the tower, Thomas. I came because Aes Sedai approached me months ago with suggestions that might happen, and your cousin informed me she had received the same. We thought we might put her on the Sun Throne before Colaver could take it. Well, Althor is no fool. Never believe he is. Myself, I think he played the tower like a harp. Colaver is hanged. He sits secure behind Cyrion's walls, without an Aes Sedai halter, I'll wager, no matter what rumor says. And until we find some way to extricate ourselves, we sit in his hand, waiting for him to make a fist." "A ship brought you," Rand said simply. "A ship could take you away." Abruptly, Min realized he was gently patting her hand on his arm, trying to soothe her. Startlingly, Darlin threw back his head and laughed. A great many women would forget his nose for those eyes and that laugh. "So it would, Thomas. But I've asked your cousin to marry me. She will not say yes or no, but a man cannot abandon even a possible wife to the mercies of the Aiel, and she will not leave." Caroline Damodred drew herself up on her saddle, face cold enough to shame an Aes Sedai, but suddenly auras of red and white flashed around her and Darlin, and Min knew. The colors never seemed to matter, but she knew that they would marry, after Caroline had led him a merry chase. More, to her eyes, a crown suddenly appeared on Darlin's head, a simple golden circlet with a slightly curved sword lying on its side above his brows. The king's crown he would wear one day, though of what country she could not say. Tyr had high lords instead of a king. Image and auras vanished as Darlin pulled his horse around to face Caroline. "There's no game to be found today. Toram has already returned to camp. I suggest we do the same." Those blue eyes scanned the surrounding trees quickly. "It seems your cousin and his wife have lost their horses. They will wander in a careless moment," he added to Rand in a kindly tone. He knew very well they had no horses. "But I'm sure Rover and Inez will give up their mounts. A walk in the air will do them good." The stout man in the red-striped coat swung down from his tall bay immediately, with a toadying smile for Darlin, and one markedly less warm, if just as greasy, for Rand. The angry-faced woman was a moment later in climbing stiffly from her silver-gray mare. She did not look pleased. Neither was Min. "You mean to go into their camp?" she whispered as Rand led her to the horses. "Are you mad?" she added before thinking. "Not yet," he said softly, touching her nose with the tip of one finger. "Thanks to you, I know that." And he boosted her onto the mare, then climbed into the bay's saddle and heeled the animal up beside Darlin. Heading north and a little toward the west across the slope, they left Rover and Inez standing beneath the trees, frowning at one another sourly. As they fell in behind with the Kyrianan, the other Tyrans shouted laughing wishes that the pair would enjoy the walk. Min would have ridden alongside Rand, but Caroline put a hand on her arm, drawing her in back of the two men. "I want to see what he does," Caroline said quietly. Which one, Min wondered. "You are his lover?" Caroline asked. "Yes," Min told her defiantly, once she could catch a breath. Her cheeks felt like fire. But the woman only nodded, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was in Kyrian. Sometimes she realized that all the sophistication she had picked up talking to worldly people was about as thick as her blouse. Rand and Darlin rode knee to knee just ahead, the younger man half a head taller than the older, each wrapped in pride like a cloak, but talking just the same. Listening was not easy. They spoke quietly, and the dead leaves rustling under the horses' hooves, fallen branches cracking, often was enough to muffle their words. The cry of a hawk overhead or the chattering of a squirrel in a tree drowned them. Still, it was possible to overhear snatches. "If I may say so, Tomas," Darlin said at one point as they headed down after the first rise, "and under the light I offer no disrespect, you are fortunate in having a beautiful wife. The light willing, I will have one as beautiful myself." "Why do they not speak of something important?" Caroline muttered. Min turned her head to hide a small smile. The Lady Caroline did not look half as displeased as she sounded. She herself had never cared whether anyone thought her pretty or not. Well, until she met Rand, anyway. Maybe Darlin's nose was not all that long. "I would have let him take Callandor from the stone," Darlin said some time later as they climbed a sparsely treed slope. "But I could not stand aside when he brought Aiel invaders into Tyr." "I've read the prophecies of the dragon," Rand said, leaning forward on the bay's neck and urging the animal on. A fine, glossy appearance the horse had, but no more bottom than his owner, Min suspected. "The stone had to fall before he could take Callandor," Rand continued. "Other Tyran lords follow him, so I hear." Darlin snorted. "They cringe and lick his boots. I could have followed if that was what he wanted. If..." With a sigh, he shook his head. "Too many ifs, Tomas. There is a saying in Tyr. Any quarrel can be forgiven, but kings never forget. Tyr has not been under a king since Arthur Hawkwing, but I think the Dragon Reborn is very like a king. No, he has attainted me with treason, as he calls it, and I must go on as I began. The light willing, I may see Tyr sovereign on its own land once more before I die." It had to be Taviran work, Min knew. The man would never have spoken this way to someone casually met, Caroline Damodred's supposed cousin or not. But what did Rand think? She could hardly wait to tell him about the crown. Topping that hill, they suddenly came on a knot of spearmen, some with a dented breastplate or helmet, most without either, who bowed as soon as they saw the party. To left and right through the trees, men could see other groups of sentries. Below, the camp lay spread out in what seemed a permanent haze of dust, down a nearly treeless slope, and across the hill valley and up the next hill. Each of the few tents was large, with some noble's banner hanging limply on a staff above the peak. Almost as many horses stood tied to picket lines as there were people, and thousands of men and a handful of women wandered among the cook fires and wagons. None raised a cheer as their leaders rode in. Min studied them over the handkerchief she pressed to her nose against the dust, not caring whether Caroline saw what she was doing. Dispirited faces watched them pass, and grim faces, people who knew they were in a trap. Here and there a house's con stood stiffly above some man's head, yet most seemed to be wearing whatever they could find, bits and pieces of armor that often neither matched nor fitted very well. A good many, though, men too tall for Kyrian, wore red coats under their battered breastplates. Min eyed a nearly obscured white lion worked on a filthy red sleeve. Darlin could only have brought a few people with him on a longboat, perhaps no more than his hunting party. Caroline looked to neither side as they rode through the camp, but whenever they came near those men in red coats, her mouth tightened. Darlin dismounted before a tremendous tent, the largest Min had ever seen, larger than any she had ever imagined, a great red-striped oval, shining in the sunlight like silk, with no fewer than 4 high conical peaks, each with the rising sun of Kyrian stirring above in a lazy breeze, gold on blue. The strumming of harps drifted out amid the murmur of voices like the sounds of geese. As servants took away the horses, Darlin offered his arm to Caroline. After a very long pause, she laid her fingers lightly on his wrist with no expression whatsoever, letting him escort her inside. "My lady wife," Rand murmured with a smile, extending his arm. Min sniffed and put her hand atop his. She would rather have hit him. He had no right to make a joke of that. He had no right to bring her here, Taviran or no Taviran. He could be killed here, burn him. But did he care if she spent the rest of her life weeping? She touched one of the striped door flaps as they went in and shook her head in wonder. It was silk. A silk tent. No sooner were they inside than she felt Rand stiffen. Darlin's shrunken retinue and Caroline's jostled around them with insincere murmurs of apology. Between the four main tent poles, long trestle tables groaning with food and drink stood about the colorful carpets that had been laid for a floor, and there were people everywhere. Kyrian and nobles in their finery, a few soldiers with the fronts of the heads shaved and powdered, plainly men of high rank by the fine cut of their coats. A handful of bards strolled playing through the crowd, picked out as much by a loftier air than any noble, as by the carved and gilded harps they carried. Yet Min's eyes flew as if pulled to the sure source of Rand's worry. 3 Aes Sedai talking together in shawls fringed green and brown and gray. Images and colors flashed around them, but not a thing she could make sense of. A swirl in the crowd revealed another, a comfortably round-faced woman. More images, more flaring colors, but all Min needed was the red-fringed shawl looped over her plump arms. Rand tucked her hand under his arm and patted it. "Don't worry," he said softly. "Everything is going well." She would have asked him what they were doing there, but she was afraid he would tell her. Darlin and Caroline had vanished into the crowd along with their followers, yet as a bowing serving man with stripes of red, green, and white on his dark cuffs offered a tray of silver goblets to Rand and Min, she reappeared, shaking off the importunings of a hatchet-faced fellow in one of those red coats. He glared at her back as she took a goblet of punch and waved the servant away, and Min's breath caught at the aura that suddenly flashed around him, bruised hues so dark they seemed nearly black. "Don't trust that man, Lady Caroline." She could not stop herself. "He will murder anyone he thinks is in his way. He'll kill for a whim, kill anybody." She clamped her teeth shut before saying more. Caroline glanced over her shoulder as the hatchet-faced man turned away abruptly. "I could believe it easily of David Hanlon," she said wryly. "His white lions fight for gold, not Kyrian, and loot worse than the Aiel. Andor became too hot for them, it seems." That with an arch glance at Rand. "Toram has promised them a great deal of gold, I think, and estates, I know." She tilted her eyes up to Min. "Do you know the man, Jaisi?" Min could only shake her head. How to explain what she did know about Hanlon now? That his hands would be red with more rapes and murders before he died. If she had known when or who, but all she knew was that he would. Anyway, telling about a viewing never changed it. What she saw happened, no matter who she warned. Sometimes, before she had learned better, it had happened because she warned. "I've heard of the White Lions," Rand said coldly. "Look among them for dark friends and you won't be disappointed." They had been some of Gabriel's soldiers. Min knew that much, and little more, except that Lord Gabriel had really been Ravine. It stood to reason that soldiers serving one of the Forsaken would include dark friends. "What of him?" Rand nodded toward a man across the tent whose long dark coat had as many stripes as Caroline's dress. Very tall for a Kyrianan, perhaps less than a full head shorter than Rand, he was slender except for broad shoulders, and strikingly good-looking, with a strong chin and just a touch of gray at his dark temples. For some reason, Min's eyes were drawn to his companion, a skinny little fellow with a large nose and wide ears, in a red silk coat that did not fit him very well. He kept fingering a curved dagger at his belt, a fancy piece with a golden sheath and a large red stone capping the hilt that seemed to catch the light darkly. She saw no auras around him. He seemed vaguely familiar. They were both looking at her and Rand. "That," Caroline breathed in a tight voice, "is Lord Toram Rioton himself." and his constant companion these past days, Master Jerael Mordeth. Odious little man. His eyes make me want to take a bath. They both make me feel unclean. She blinked, surprised at what she had said, but recovered quickly. Min had the feeling little put Caroline Domodred off her stride for long. In that she was very like Moiraine. I would be careful were I you, cousin Tomas, she went on. You may have wrought some miracle or Taviran work on me, and perhaps even on Darlin, though I cannot say what it might come to. I make no promises. But Toram hates you with a passion. It was not so bad before Mordeth joined him, yet since... Toram would have us attack the city immediately in the night. With you dead, he says, the Aiel would go, but I think it is you dead he seeks now, even more than he does the throne. Mordeth, Rand said. His eyes were locked to Toram Rioton and the skinny fellow. His name is Padan Fain, and there are 100,000 golden crowns on his head. Caroline nearly dropped her goblet. Queens have been ransomed for less. What did he do? He ravaged my home because it was my home. Rand's face was frozen, his voice ice. He brought Trollocs to kill my friends because they were my friends. He is a dark friend and a dead man. Those last words came through clenched teeth. Punch splashed the carpet as the silver goblet bent in his gloved fist. Min felt sick for him, for his pain. She had heard what Fain had done in the Two Rivers, but she put a hand on Rand's chest in near panic. If he gave way now, channeled with who knew how many Aes Sedai around, for the light's sake, take hold of yourself, she began, and a woman's voice spoke pleasantly behind her. Will you present me to your tall young friend, Caroline? Min looked over her shoulder, right into an ageless face, cool-eyed beneath iron gray hair pulled up into a bun from which dangled small golden ornaments. Swallowing a squeak, Min coughed. She had thought Caroline had taken her in one glance, but these cool eyes seemed to know things about her she herself had forgotten. The Aes Sedai's smile as she adjusted her green-fringed shawl was not nearly so pleasant as her voice. Of course, Cadsuane Sedai. Caroline sounded shaken, but she smoothed her tone well before she finished introducing her visiting cousin and his wife. But I fear Cairhien is no place for them at present, she said, all self-possession once more, smiling regret that she could not keep Rand and Min longer. They have agreed to take my advice and return to Andor. Have they? Cadsuane said dryly. Min's heart sank. Even if Rand had not spoken of her, it was clear from the way she looked at him that she knew him. Tiny golden birds and moons and stars swayed as she shook her head. Most boys learn not to stick their fingers into the pretty fire the first time they are burned, Thomas. Others need to be spanked to learn. Better a tender bottom than a seared hand. You know I'm no child, Rand told her sharply. Do I? She eyed him from head to toe and made it seem no very great distance. Well, it seems I shall soon see whether or not you need spanking. Those cool eyes drifted to Min, to Caroline, and with a final hitch to her shawl, Cadsuane herself drifted away into the crowd. Min swallowed the lump in her throat and was pleased to see Caroline do the same, self-possession or no. Rand, the blind fool, stared after the Aes Sedai as though intending to go after her. This time it was Caroline who laid a hand on Rand's chest. I take it you know, Cadsuane, she said breathily. Be careful of her. Even the other sisters stand in awe of her. Her throaty tones took on a note of gravity. I have no idea what will come of today, but whatever it is, I think it is time you were gone, cousin Thomas. Past time. I will have horses. This is your cousin, Caroline, said a deep, rich man's voice, and Min jumped in spite of herself. Toram Rioton was even better looking close up than at a distance, with the sort of strong male beauty and air of worldly knowledge that would have attracted men before she met Rand.
Be right
Well,
back.
she still found them attractive, just not as much as she did Rand. His firm-lipped smile was quite appealing. Toram's gaze fell to Caroline's hand, still on Rand's chest. "The Lady Caroline is to be my wife," he said lazily. "Did you know that?" Caroline's cheeks reddened angrily. "Do not say that, Toram. I have told you I will not, and I will not." Toram smiled at Rand. "I think women never know their minds until you show them. What do you think, Jerael?" "Jerael?" He looked around, scowling. Men stared at him in amazement. And he was so pretty, with just the right air of... She wished she could call up viewings at will. She very much wanted to know what the future held for this man. "I saw your friend scurry off that way, Toram." Mouth twisted with distaste, Caroline gave a vague wave of her hand. "You will find him near the drink, I think, or else bothering the serving girls." "Later, my precious." He tried to touch her cheek and looked amused when she stepped back. Without a pause, he transferred his amusement to Rand and the sword at his side. "Would you care for a little sport, cousin? I call you that because we will be cousins once Caroline is my wife. With practice swords, of course." "Certainly not," Caroline laughed. "He is a boy, Toram, and scarce knows one end of that thing from the other. His mother would never forgive me if I allowed..." "Sport," Rand said abruptly. "I might as well see where this leads." "I agree." Chapter 36. Blades. Men did not know whether to groan or shout or sit down and cry. Caroline, staring wide-eyed at Rand, seemed in the same quandary. With a laugh, Toram began rubbing his hands together. "Listen,
I see
everyone," he shouted. "You are going to see some sport. Clear a space. Clear a space." He strode off, waving people away from the center of the tent. "Sheep herder,"
Hey, buddy.
men growled. "You're not bull-brained. You don't have any brains." "I would not put it quite so," Caroline said in a very dry voice. "But I suggest you leave now. Whatever tricks you think you might use, there are 7 Aes Sedai in this tent. 4 of them Red Aja, lately arrived from the south on their way to Tarvalon. Should one of them so much as suspect, I very much fear that whatever might have come of today never will. Leave. I won't use any tricks." Rand unbuckled his sword belt and handed it to Min. "If I've touched you and Darlin in one way, maybe I can touch Toram in another." The crowd was pushing back, opening up an area 20 paces across between 2 of the great center poles. Some looked to Rand, and there was a great deal of rib nudging and sly laughter. The Aes Sedai were offered pride of place, of course. Cadsuane and her 2 friends on one side, 4 ageless women in red Aja shawls on the other. Cadsuane and her companions were eyeing Rand with open disapproval, and as close to irritation as any Aes Sedai ever let show, but the Red Sisters looked more concerned with those 3. At least, although they stood directly opposite, they managed to seem oblivious of the presence of any other sisters. No one could be that blind without trying. "Listen to me, cousin." Caroline's low voice almost crackled with urgency. She stood very close, her neck craned to look up at him. Barely reaching his chest, she seemed ready to box his ears. "If you use none of your special tricks," Caroline went on, "he can hurt you badly, even with practice swords, and he will. He has never liked another touching what he thinks is his, and he suspects every pretty young man who speaks to me of being my lover. When we were children, he pushed a friend, down the stairs and broke his back because Darrowen rode his pony without asking. Go, cousin. No one will think less. No one expects a boy to face a blade master. Jaisi, whatever your real name is, help me convince him." Min opened her mouth, and Rand laid a finger across her lips. "I am who I am," he smiled, "and I don't think I could run from him if I wasn't. So he's a blade master." Unbuttoning his coat, he strode out into the cleared area. Why must they be so stubborn when you least wish it? Caroline whispered in tones of frustration. Min could only nod in agreement. Toram had stripped to shirt and breeches and carried 2 practice swords, their blades bundles of thin laths tied together. He raised an eyebrow at the sight of Rand with his coat simply hanging open. You will be confined in that, cousin. Rand shrugged. Without warning, Toram tossed one of the swords. Rand caught it out of the air by the long hilt. Those gloves will slip, cousin. You want a firm grip. Rand took the hilt in both hands and turned slightly sideways, blade down and left foot forward. Toram spread his hands as if to say he had done all he could. Well, at least he knows how to stand, he laughed, and on the last word darted forward, practice sword streaking for Rand's head with all his might behind it. With a loud clack, bundled blades met bundled blades. Rand had moved nothing except his sword. For a moment, Toram stared at him, and Rand looked back calmly. Then they began to dance. That was all Min could call it, that gliding, flowing movement, wooden blades flickering and spinning. She had watched Rand practice the sword against the best he could find, often against 2 or 3 or 4 at once, but that had been nothing to this. So beautiful, and so easy to forget that had those lathes been steel, blood could have flowed, except that no blade, steel or lathes, touched flesh. Back and forth they danced, circling one another, swords now probing, now slashing, Rand attacking, now defending, and every movement punctuated by those loud clacks. Caroline gripped Min's arm hard without taking her eyes from the contest. He is also a blade master, she breathed. He must be. Look at him. Min was looking, and hugging Rand's sword belt and scabbarded blade as if they were him. Back and forth in beauty, and whatever Rand thought, Toram clearly wished his blade was steel. Cold rage burned on his face, and he pressed harder, harder. Still no blade touched anything but another, yet now Rand backed away constantly, sword darting to defend, and Toram moved forward, attacking, eyes glittering with icy fury. Outside, someone screamed, a wail of utter horror, and suddenly the huge tent snapped up into the air, vanishing into a thick grayness that hid the sky. Fog billowed on every side, filled with distant shrieks and bellows. Thin tendrils wafted into the clear, inverted bowl left by the tent. Everyone stared in amazement. Almost everyone. Toram's lathe blade smashed into Rand's side with a bone-crack sound, doubling him over. You are dead, cousin, Toram sneered, lifting his sword high to strike again, and froze, staring, as part of the heavy gray mist overhead solidified. A tentacle of fog it might have been, a thick, 3-toed arm reaching down, closed around the stout red sister, snatching her into the air before anyone had a chance to move. Cadsuane was the first to overcome shock. Her arms rose, shaking back her shawl. Her hands made a twist, and a ball of fire seemed to shoot upward from each palm, streaking into the mist. Above, something suddenly burst into flame, one violent gout that vanished immediately, and the red sister fell back into sight, dropping with a thud face down on the carpets near where Rand knelt on one knee, clutching his side. At least she would have been face down, had not her head been twisted around so her dead eyes stared up into the fog. Whatever scraps of composure remained in the tent fled with that. The shadow had been given flesh. Screaming people fled in every direction, knocking over tables, nobles clawing past servants, and servants past nobles. Buffeted, men fought her way to Rand with fists and elbows and his sword as a club. Are you all right? She asked, pulling him to his feet. She was surprised to see Caroline on the other side, helping him too. For that matter, Caroline looked surprised. He took his hand from beneath his coat, fingers thankfully free of blood. That half-healed scar, so tender, had not broken open. I think we best move, he said, taking his sword belt. We have to get out of this. The inverted bowl of clear air was noticeably smaller. Almost everyone else had fled. Out in the fog, screams rose, most cutting off abruptly, but always replaced by new. "I agree, Thomas," Darlin said. Sword in hand, he planted himself with his back to Caroline, between her and the fog. "The question is, in which direction? And also, how far do we have to go?" "This is his work," Toram spat. "Althor's." Hurling down his practice sword, he stalked to his discarded coat and calmly donned it. Whatever else he was no coward. "Jerael," he shouted at the fog as he fastened his sword belt. "Jerael, the light burn you man, where are you? Jerael!" Mordeth, Fane, did not answer, and he went on shouting. The only others still there were Cadsuane and her two companions, faces calm, but hands running nervously over their shawls. Cadsuane herself might have been setting out for a stroll. "I should think north," she said. "The slope lies closer that way, and climbing may take us above this." "Stop that caterwauling, Toram. Either your man's dead or he can't hear." Toram glared at her, but he did stop shouting. Cadsuane did not appear to notice or care, so long as he was silent. "North, then. We three will take care of anything your steel can't handle." She looked straight at Rand when she said that, and he gave a whisker of a nod before buckling his sword belt and drawing his blade. Trying not to goggle, Min exchanged glances with Caroline. The other woman's eyes looked as large as teacups. The Aes Sedai knew who he was, and she was going to keep anyone else from knowing. "I wish we had not left our warders back in the city," the slim yellow sister said. Tiny silver bells in her dark hair chimed as she tossed her head. She had almost as commanding an air as Cadsuane, enough that you did not realize how pretty she was at first, except that that toss of her head seemed, well, a touch petulant. "I wish I had Roshan here." "A circle, Cadsuane?" the gray asked. Head turning this way and that to peer at the fog, she looked like a plump, pale-haired sparrow with her sharp nose and inquisitive eyes. Not a frightened sparrow, but one definitely ready to take wing. "Should we link?" "No, Neanda," Cadsuane sighed. "If you see something, you must be able to strike at it without waiting to point it out for me. Samitsu, stop worrying about Roshan. We have 3 fine swords here.
Good,
2 of them heron
1 second.
mark, I see. They will do." Toram showed his teeth on seeing the heron engraved on the blade Rand had unsheathed. If it was a smile, it held no mirth. His own bared blade bore a heron, too. Darlin's did not, but he gave Rand and his sword a weighing look, then a respectful nod that was considerably deeper than he had offered plain Thomas Trakand of a minor branch of the house. The gray-haired green had taken charge, clearly, and she kept it despite attempted protests from Darlin, who, like many tyrants, seemed not to relish Aes Sedai a great deal, and Toram, who just seemed to dislike anyone giving orders but himself. For that matter, so did Caroline, but Cadsuane ignored her frowns as completely as she did the men's voiced complaints. Unlike them, Caroline appeared to realize complaints would do no good. Wonder of wonders, Rand meekly let himself be placed to Cadsuane's right as she quickly arranged everyone. Well, not exactly meekly. He stared down his nose at her in a way that would have made Min slap him if he did it to her. Cadsuane just shook her head and muttered something that reddened his face, but at least he kept his mouth shut. Right then, Min almost thought he would announce who he was, and maybe expect the fog to vanish in fear of the dragon reborn. He smiled at her as though fog in this weather was nothing, even a fog that snatched tents and people. They moved into the thick mist in a formation like a 6-pointed star, Cadsuane herself in the lead, and Aes Sedai at each of 2 other points, a man with a sword at 3. Toram, of course, protested loudly at bringing up the rear, until Cadsuane mentioned the honor of the rear guard or some such. That quieted him down. Min had no objection whatsoever to her own position with Caroline in the center of the star. She carried a knife in either hand and wondered whether they would be any use. It was something of a relief to see the dagger in Caroline's fist tremble. At least her own hands were steady. Then again, she thought she might be too frightened to shake. The fog was cold as winter. Grayness closed around them in swirls, so heavy it was difficult to see the others clearly. Hearing was all too easy, though. Shrieks drifted through the murk, men and women crying out, horses screaming. The fog seemed to deaden sound, make it hollow, so that thankfully those awful sounds seemed distant. The mist ahead began to thicken, but fireballs immediately shot from Cadsuane's hands, sizzling through the icy gray, and the thickening erupted in one roaring flare of flame. Roars behind, light flashing against the fog like lightning against clouds, spoke of the other two sisters at work. Min had no desire to look back. What she could see was more than enough. Past trampled tents, half obscured by gray haze, they moved, past bodies and sometimes parts of bodies not nearly obscured enough. A leg, an arm, a man who was not there from the waist down. Once a woman's head that seemed to grin from where it sat on the corner of an overturned wagon. The land began to slope upward, steeper. Men saw her first living soul besides them and wished she had not. A man wearing one of the red coats staggered toward them, waving his left arm feebly. The other was gone, and wet white bone showed where half his face had been. Something that might have been words bubbled through his teeth, and he collapsed. Samitsu knelt briefly beside him, putting her fingers against the bloody ruin of his forehead. Rising, she shook her head, and they moved on. Upslope and up, until Min began wondering whether they were climbing a mountain instead of a hill. Right in front of Darlin, the fog suddenly began to take on form, a man-high shape, but all tentacles and gaping mouths full of sharp teeth. The High Lord might have been no blade master, but he was not slow either. His blade sliced through the middle of the still coalescing shape, looped and slashed it top to bottom. 4 clouds of fog, thicker than the surrounding mist, settled to the ground. "Well," he said, "at least we know steel can cut these creatures." The thicker chunks of fog oozed together, began to rise once more. Cadsuane stretched out a hand, droplets of fire falling from her fingertips. One bright flash of flame seared the solidifying fog from existence. "But no more than cut, so it seems," she murmured. Ahead to their right, a woman suddenly appeared in the swirling gray, silk skirts held high as she half ran, half fell down the slope toward them. "Thank the light!" she screamed. "Thank the light! I thought I was alone!" Right behind her, the fog drew together, a nightmare all teeth and claws looming above her. Had it been a man, Min was sure Rand would have waited. His hand rose before Cadsuane could move, and a bar of something, liquid white fire brighter than the sun, shot out over the running woman's head. The creature simply vanished. For a moment there was clear air where it had been, and along the line that the bar had burned, until the fog began closing in. A moment while the woman froze where she stood. Then, shrieking at the top of her lungs, she turned and ran from them, still down slope, fleeing what she feared more than nightmares in these mists. "You!" Toram roared, so loudly that Min spun to face him with her knives raised. He stood pointing his sword at Rand. "You are him. I was right. This is your work. You will not trap me, Althor." Suddenly he broke away at an angle, scrambling wildly up the slope. "You will not trap me." "Come back," Darlin shouted after him. "We must stick together. We must..." Off, staring at Rand. "You are him. Oh, burn me, you are." He half moved, as if to place himself between Rand and Caroline, but at least he did not run. Calmly, Cadsuane picked her way across the slope to Rand, and slapped his face so hard his head jerked. Min's breath caught in shock. "You will not do that again," Cadsuane said. There was no heat in her voice, just iron. "Do you hear me? Not balefire. Not ever." Surprisingly, Rand only rubbed his cheek. "You were wrong, Cadsuane. He's real. I'm certain of it. I know he is." Even more surprisingly, he sounded as if he very much wanted her to believe. Min's heart went out to him. He had mentioned hearing voices. He must mean that. She raised her right hand toward him, forgetting for the moment that it held a knife, and opened her mouth to say something comforting, though she was not entirely sure she would ever be able to use that other word innocuously again. She opened her mouth, and Pt.11 seemed to leap out of the mists behind Rand, steel gleaming in his fist. "Behind you!" Min screamed, pointing with the knife in her outstretched right hand as she threw the one in her left. Everything seemed to happen at once, half seen in wintry fog. Rand began to turn, twisting aside, and Fane also twisted, to lunge for him. For that twist, her knife missed, but Fane's dagger scored along Rand's left side. It hardly seemed to more than slice his coat, yet he screamed. He screamed, a sound to make Min's heart clench, and clutching his side, he fell against Cadsuane, catching at her to hold himself up, pulling both of them down. "Move out of my way!" one of the other sisters shouted. Samitsu, Min thought, and suddenly Min's feet jerked out from under her. She landed heavily, grunting as she hit the slope together with Caroline, who snapped a breathless, "Blood and fire!" everything at once. "Move!" Samitsu shouted again as Darlin lunged for Fane with his sword. The bony man moved with shocking speed, throwing himself down and rolling beyond Darlin's reach. Strangely, he cackled with laughter as he scampered to his feet and ran off, swallowed in the murk almost immediately. Min pushed herself up, shaking. Caroline was much more vigorous. "I will tell you now, Aes Sedai," she said in a cold voice, brushing at her skirts violently. "I will not be treated so. I am Caroline Damodred, High Seat of House—" Min stopped listening. Cadsuane was sitting on the slope above, holding Rand's head in her lap. It had only been a cut. Fane's dagger could not have more than touched. With a cry, Min threw herself forward. Aes Sedai or no, she pushed the woman away from Rand and cradled his head in her arms. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged, his face felt hot. "Help him!" she screamed at Cadsuane, like an echo of the distant screams in the mist. "Help him!" A part of her said that did not make much sense after pushing her away, but his face seemed to burn her hands, to burn sense. "Samitsu, quickly," Cadsuane said, standing and rearranging her shawl. "He's beyond my talent for healing." She laid a hand on the top of Min's head. "Girl, I will hardly let the boy die when I haven't taught him manners yet. Stop crying now." It was very strange. Min was fairly sure the woman had done nothing to her with the power, yet she believed. Teach him manners? A fine tussle that would be. Unfolding her arms from around his head, not without reluctance, Min backed away on her knees. Very strange. She had not even realized that she was crying, yet Cadsuane's reassurance was enough to stop the flow of tears. Sniffing, she scrubbed at her cheeks with the heel of her hand as Samitsu knelt beside him, placing fingertips on his forehead. Min wondered why she did not take his head in both hands the way Moiraine did. Abruptly, Rand convulsed, gasping and thrashing so hard that a flailing arm knocked the yellow over on her back. As soon as her fingers left him, he subsided. Min crawled nearer. He breathed more easily, but his eyes were still closed. She touched his cheek. Cooler than it had been, but still too warm and pale. "Something is amiss," Samitsu said peevishly as she sat up. Pulling Rand's coat aside, she gripped the slice in his blood-stained shirt and ripped a wide gap in the linen. The cut from Fane's dagger, no longer than her hand and not deep, ran right across the old round scar. Even in the dim light, Min could see that the edges of the gash looked swollen and angry, as if the wound had gone untended for days. It was no longer bleeding, but it should have been gone. That was what healing did. Wounds knitted themselves up right before your eyes. "This," Samitsu said in a lecturing tone, lightly touching the scar, "seems like a cyst, but full of evil instead of pus. And this," she drew the finger down the gash, "seems full of a different evil." Suddenly she frowned at the green standing over her, and her voice became sullen and defensive. If I had the words, Cadsuane, I would use them. I have never seen the like. Never. But I will tell you this. I think if I had been one moment slower, perhaps if you had not tried first, he would be dead now. As it is, with a sigh, the yellow sister seemed to deflate, her face sagging. As it is, I believe he will die. Min shook her head, trying to say no, but she could not seem to make her tongue move. She heard Caroline murmuring a prayer. The woman stood gripping one of Darlin's coat sleeves with both hands. Darlin himself frowned down at Rand as though trying to make sense of what he saw. Cadsuane bent to pat Samitsu's shoulder. You are the best living, perhaps the best ever, she said quietly. No one has the healing to compare with you. With a nod, Samitsu stood, and before she was on her feet, she was all Aes Sedai serenity once more. Cadsuane, scowling down at Rand with her hands on her hips, was not. Fall. I will not allow you to die on me, boy, she growled, sounding as though it were his fault. This time, instead of touching the top of Min's head, she rapped it with a knuckle. Get to your feet, girl. You're no milksop, any fool can see that, so stop pretending. Darlin, you will carry him. Bandages must wait. This fog is not leaving us, so we had better leave it. Darlin hesitated. Maybe it was Cadsuane's peremptory frown, and maybe the hand Caroline half raised to his face, but abruptly he sheathed his sword, muttered under his breath, and hoisted Rand across his shoulders with arms and legs dangling. Min took up the heron-mark blade and carefully slid it into the scabbard hanging from Rand's waist. He will need it, she told Darlin, and after a moment he nodded. A lucky thing for him he did. She had bundled all her confidence into the Green Sister, and she was not about to let anyone think differently. Now be careful, Darlin, Caroline said in that throaty voice once Cadsuane made their marching order clear. Be sure to stay behind me, and I will protect you. Darlin laughed till he wheezed, and was still chuckling when they began climbing through the cold fog and the distant shrieks once more, with him carrying Rand in the center, and the women in a circle around him. Min knew she was only another pair of eyes, just like Caroline on the other side of Cadsuane, and she knew the knife she carried unsheathed was no use against the mist shapes, but Padan Fain might still be alive out there. She would not miss again. Caroline carried her dagger too, and by the looks she cast over her shoulder at Darlin staggering uphill under Rand's weight, maybe she also intended to protect the dragon reborn. And then again, maybe it was not him. A woman could forgive any amount of no's for that laugh. Shapes still formed in the mist and died by fire, and once a huge something tore a shrieking horse in two off to their right before any Aes Sedai could slay it. Min was quite noisily sick after that, and not a bit ashamed. People were dying, but at least the people had come here by their own choice. The meanest soldier could have run away yesterday had he chosen, but not that horse. Shapes formed and died, and people died, screaming always in the distance it seemed, though they still stumbled past torn carrion that had been human an hour gone. Min began to wonder whether they would ever see daylight again. With shocking suddenness and no warning, she stumbled into it, one moment surrounded by gray, the next with the sun burning golden high overhead in a blue sky, all so bright she had to shade her eyes. And there, perhaps 5 miles across all but treeless hills, Cairn rose solid and square on its own provenances. Somehow it did not look quite real anymore. Staring back at the edge of the fog, she shivered. It was an edge, a billowing wall, stretching through the trees on this hilltop, and far too straight, with no eddies or thinning. Just clear air here and there, thick gray. A little more of a tree right in front of her became visible, and she realized the mist was creeping back, perhaps being burned off by the sun, but far too slowly to make the retreat natural. The others stared at it just as hard as she, even the Aes Sedai. 20 paces off to their left, a man suddenly scrambled into the clear air on all fours. The front of his head was shaved, and by the battered black breastplate he wore, he was a common soldier. Staring about wildly, he did not appear to see them, and went scrambling on down the hillside, still on hands and knees. Farther to the right, 2 men and a woman appeared, all running. She had stripes of color across the front of her dress, but how many was hard to say, since she had gathered her skirts as high as she could to run faster, and she matched the men stride for stride. None of them looked to either side, only launched themselves down the hill, falling, tumbling, and coming back to their feet, running again. Caroline studied the slim blade of her dagger for a moment, then thrust it hard into its sheath. So vanishes my army, she sighed. Darlin, with Rand still unconscious across his shoulders, looked at her. There is an army in Tyr if you call. She glanced at Rand, hanging like a sack. Perhaps, she said. Darlin turned his head toward Rand's face with a troubled frown. Cadsuane was all practicality. The road lies that way, she said, pointing west. It will be faster than walking cross-country, an easy stroll. Easy was not what Min would have called it. The air seemed twice as hot after the fog's cold. Sweat rolled out of her and seemed to drain her strength. Her legs wobbled. She tripped over exposed roots and fell flat on her face. She tripped over rocks and fell. She tripped over her own heeled boots and fell. Once her feet just went out from under, and she slid a good 40 paces down the hillside on the seat of her breeches, arms flailing until she managed to snag a sapling. Caroline went sprawling as many times, and maybe more. Dresses were not made for this sort of travel, and before long, after a tumble head over heels ended with her skirts around her ears, she was asking Min the name of the seamstress who made her coat and breeches. Darlin did not fall. Oh, he stumbled and tripped and skidded every bit as much as they, but whenever he started to fall, something seemed to catch him, to steady him on his feet. In the beginning, he glared at the Aes Sedai, all proud tyrant high lord who would carry Rand out without any help. Cadsuane and the others affected not to see. They never fell. They simply walked along, chatting quietly among themselves, and caught Darlin before he could. By the time they reached the road, he looked both grateful and hunted. Standing in the middle of the broad road of hard-packed earth in sight of the river, Cadsuane flung up a hand to stop the first conveyance that appeared, a rickety wagon drawn by 2 moth-eaten mules and driven by a skinny farmer in a patched coat who hauled on his reins with alacrity. What did the toothless fellow think he had run into? 3 ageless Aes Sedai, complete with shawls, who might have stepped down from a coach a moment before. A sweat-soaked Kyrian woman of high rank by the stripes on her dress, or maybe a beggar who had clothed herself from a noblewoman's rag closet by the state of that dress. An obvious Tyran nobleman, with sweat dripping from his nose and pointed beard, and carrying another man across his shoulders like a sack of grain, and herself. Both knees out of her breeches, and another tear in the seat that her coat covered, thank the light, though one sleeve hung by a few threads. More stains and dust than she wanted to think about. Not waiting for anyone else, she drew a knife from her sleeve, popping most of those few threads, and gave it a flourish the way Tom Marilyn had taught her, hilt snaking through her fingers so the blade flashed in the sun. "We require a ride to the Sun Palace," she announced, and Rand himself could not have done better. There were times when being peremptory saved argument. "Child," Cadsuane said chidingly, "I'm sure Kiruna and her friends would do everything they could, but there isn't a yellow among them. Samitsu and Corel really are 2 of the best ever. Lady Arilyn has very kindly lent us her palace in the city, so we will take him." "No." Min had no idea where she found the courage to say that word to this woman, except it was Rand they were talking about. "If he wakes," she stopped to swallow, "he would wake. If he wakes in a strange place, surrounded by strange Aes Sedai again, I can't imagine what he might do. You don't want to imagine it." For a long moment she met that cool gaze, and then the Aes Sedai nodded. "The Sun Palace," Cadsuane told the farmer, "and as fast as you make these flea bags move." Of course, it was not quite so simple, even for Aes Sedai. Under Toll had a wagon load of scraggly turnips he intended to sell in the city, and no intention of going anywhere near the Sun Palace, where he told them the dragon reborn ate people who were cooked on spits by Aiel women 10 feet tall. Not for any number of Aes Sedai would he venture within a mile of the palace. On the other hand, Cadsuane tossed him a purse that made his eyes pop when he looked inside, then told him she'd just bought his turnips and hired him and his wagon. If he did not like the notion, he could give the purse back. That, with her fists on her hips and a look on her face that said he might just eat his wagon on the spot if he tried giving the purse back. Ander Toll was a reasonable man, it turned out. Samitsu and Nyanda unloaded the wagon, turnips simply flying into the air to land in a tidy pile by the roadside. By their icy expressions, this was in no way a use to which they had ever expected to put the one power. By Darlin's expression, standing there with Rand still on his shoulders, he was relieved they had not called on him to do it. Ander Toll sat on the wagon seat with his jaw trying to reach his knees, fingering the purse as though wondering whether it was enough after all. Once they were settled in the wagon bed, with the straw that had been beneath the turnips all gathered to make a bed for Rand, Cadsuane faced Min across him. Master Toll was flapping his reins and finding a surprising turn of speed in those mules. The wagon lurched and jounced horribly, the wheels not only shaking, but apparently out of round. Wishing she had kept just a little of the straw for herself, Min was amused to see Samitsu and Nyanda growing tighter in the face as they were bounced up and down. Caroline smiled at them quite openly, the high seat of House Damodred not bothering to hide her pleasure that the Aes Sedai were for once riding rough. Though in truth, slight as she was, she bounced higher and came down with harder thumps than they. Darlin, holding on to the side of the wagon, appeared unaffected, however hard he was shaken. He kept frowning and looking from Caroline to Rand. Cadsuane was another who apparently did not care whether her teeth rattled. "I expect to be there before nightfall, Master Toll," she called, producing more flapping, if no more speed. "Now tell me," she said, turning to Min, "exactly what happened the last time this boy woke surrounded by strange Aes Sedai?" Her eyes caught Min's and held them. He wanted it kept secret if it could be, for as long as it could be, but he was dying, and the only chance he had that Min saw rested in these 3 women. Maybe knowing could not help. Maybe knowing could at least make them understand something of him. "They put him in a box," she began. She was not sure how she went on, except that she had to, or how she kept from bursting into tears, except that she was not going to break down again when Rand needed her. But somehow she continued through the confinement and the beatings without a tremor in her voice, right to Kiruna and the rest kneeling to swear fealty. Darlin and Caroline looked stunned. Samitsu and Nyanda looked horrified, though not for the reason she would have supposed, it turned out. "He stilled 3 sisters?" Samitsu said shrilly. Suddenly she slapped a hand over her mouth and twisted around to lean over the side of the swaying wagon and retch loudly. Nyanda joined her almost before she began, the pair of them hanging there, emptying their bellies. And Cadsuane touched Rand's pale face, brushed strands of hair from his forehead. "Do not be afraid, boy," she said softly. "They made my task harder and yours, but I will not hurt you more than I must." Min turned to ice inside. Guards at the city gates shouted at the racing wagon, but Cadsuane told Master Toll not to stop, and he flailed at his mules all the harder. People in the streets leaped out of the way to avoid being run down, and the wagon's progress left behind shouts and curses, overturned sedan chairs, and coaches run into street vendors' stalls. Through the streets and up the broad ramp to the Sun Palace, where guards in Lord Dobrain's colors spilled out as though preparing to fight off hordes. While Master Toll was squealing at the top of his lungs that Aes Sedai made him do it, the soldiers saw Min. Then they saw Rand. Min had thought she was in a whirlwind before, but she had been wrong. 24 men tried to reach into the wagon at once to lift Rand out, and those who managed to lay hands on him handled him as gently as a babe, 4 to either side with their arms beneath. Cadsuane must have repeated 1,000 times that he was not dead as they hurried into the palace and along corridors that seemed longer than Min remembered, with more Kyrianan soldiers crowding along behind. Nobles began appearing from every doorway and crossing hall, it seemed, faces bloodless, staring as Rand passed. She lost track of Caroline and Darlin, realized she could not remember seeing them since the wagon, and wishing them well, forgot them. Rand was the only thing she cared about, the only thing in the world. Nandera was with the Far Darais Mai, guarding the doors to Rand's rooms with their gilded rising suns. When the graying maiden saw Rand, stone-faced Aiel composure shattered. "What has happened to him?" she wailed, eyes going wide. "What has happened?" Some of the other maidens began to moan, a low, hair-raising sound like a dirge. "Be quiet!" Cadsuane roared, slapping her hands together in a thunder crack. "You, girl! He needs his bed. Hop!" Nandera hopped. Rand was stripped and in his bed in a twinkling, with Samitsu and Neanda both hovering over him, the Kyrianan chased out, and Nandera at the door repeating Cadsuane's instructions that he was not to be disturbed by anyone. All so fast, Min felt dizzy. She hoped one day to see the confrontation between Cadsuane and the wise one Cerilia. It had to come, and it would be memorable. Yet if Cadsuane thought her instructions were really going to keep everyone out, she was mistaken. Before she had more than moved a chair, floating it on the power, to sit beside Rand's bed, Kiruna and Bera strode in like the two faces of pride, ruler of a court and ruler of her farmhouse. "What is this I hear about?" Kiruna began furiously. She saw Cadsuane. Bera saw Cadsuane. To Min's amazement, they stopped there with their mouths hanging open. "He is in good hands," Cadsuane said. "Unless one of you has suddenly found more talent for healing than I recall." "Yes, Cadsuane," they said meekly. "No, Cadsuane." Min closed her own mouth. Samitsu took an ivory-inlaid chair against the wall, spreading her dark yellow skirts, and sat with her hands folded, watching Rand's chest rise and fall beneath the sheet. Neanda went to Rand's bookshelf and selected a book before she sat near the windows. Reading! Kiruna and Bera started to sit, then actually looked to Cadsuane and waited for her impatient nod before they sat down. "Why aren't you doing something?" Min shouted. "That is what I might ask," Amis said, walking into the room. The youthful, white-haired wise one stared at Rand for a moment, then shifted her deep brown shawl and turned to Kiruna and Bera. "You may go," she said. "And Kiruna, Cerilia wishes to see you again." Kiruna's dark face paled, but the pair of them rose and curtsied, murmuring, "Yes, Amis," even more meekly than for Cadsuane, before leaving with embarrassed glances at the green sister. "Interesting," Cadsuane said when they were gone. Her dark eyes locked with Amis's blue, and Cadsuane at least seemed to like what she saw. At any rate, she smiled. "I should like to meet this Cerilia. She is a strong woman." She seemed to emphasize the word strong. "The strongest I have ever known," Amis said simply, calmly. You would never have thought Rand lay senseless in front of her. "I do not know your healing, Aes Sedai. I trust that you have done what can be done." Her tone was flat. Min doubted how much Amis did trust.
Hey, Soy, how you doing?
"What can be done has
Hope
been,"
you're doing
Cadsuane
good.
sighed. "All we can do now is wait." "While he dies," a man's harsh voice said, and Min jumped. Dashiva strode into the room, his plain face contorted in a scowl. "Flynn," he snapped. Neanda's book thudded to the floor from apparently nerveless fingers. She stared at the three men in black coats as she would have at the Dark One himself. Pale-faced, Samitsu muttered something that sounded like a prayer. At Dashiva's command, the grizzled Ashaman limped to the bed on the opposite side from Cadsuane and began running his hands along the length of Rand's still body a foot above the sheet. Young Narishma stood frowning by the door, fingering the hilt of his sword, those big dark eyes trying to watch all three Aes Sedai at once. The Aes Sedai and Amis. He did not look afraid, just a man confidently waiting for those women to show themselves his enemies. Unlike the Aes Sedai, Amis ignored the Ashaman, except for Flynn. Her eyes followed him, smooth face, utterly expressionless, but her thumb ran along the haft of her belt knife in a very expressive manner. "What are you doing?" Samitsu demanded, leaping up from her chair. Whatever her unease about Ashaman, concern for her unconscious patient had overcome it. "You, Flynn, or whoever you are." She started toward the bed, and Narishma flowed to block her. Frowning, she tried to go around, and he put a hand on her arm. "Another boy with no manners," Cadsuane murmured. Of the three sisters, only she displayed no alarm whatsoever at the Ashaman. Instead, she studied them over steepled fingers. Narishma flushed at her comment and removed his hand, but when Samitsu tried to go around him again, he once more stepped in front of her. She settled for glaring past his shoulder. "You, Flynn, what are you doing? I won't have you killing him with your ignorance. Do you hear me?" Min practically danced from foot to foot. She did not think an Ashaman would kill Rand, not on purpose, but he trusted them. But Light, even Amis did not seem sure, frowning from Flynn to Rand. Flynn stripped the sheet down to Rand's waist, exposing the wound. The gash looked neither better nor worse than she remembered, a gaping, angry, bloodless wound slicing across the round scar. He appeared to be sleeping. "He can't do any worse than Rand already is," Min said. Nobody paid her any mind. Dashiva made a guttural sound, and Flynn looked at him. "You see something, Ashama?" "I have no talent for healing," Dashiva said, twisting his mouth wryly. "You're the one who took my suggestion and learned." "What suggestion?" Samitsu demanded. "I insist that you be quiet, Samitsu," Cadsuane said. She seemed to be the only one in the room who was calm aside from Amis, and from the way the wise one kept stroking her knife hilt, Min was not certain about her. "I think the last thing he wants to do is harm the boy." "But Cadsuane," Nyanda began urgently, "that man is—" "I said be quiet," the gray-haired Aes Sedai told her firmly. "I assure you," Dashiva said, managing to sound oily and harsh at the same time, "Flynn knows what he is about. Already he can do things you Aes Sedai never dreamed of." Samitsu sniffed loudly. Cadsuane merely nodded and sat back in her chair. Flynn traced his finger along the puffy gash in Rand's side and across the old scar. That did seem more tender. "These are alike, but different, as if there's two kinds of infection at work. Only it isn't infection, it's darkness. I can't think of a better word." He shrugged, eyeing Samitsu's yellow-fringed shawl as she frowned at him, but it was a considering look she gave him now. "Get on with it, Flynn," Dashiva muttered. "If he dies—" Nose wrinkled as though at a bad smell, he seemed unable to look away from Rand. His lips moved as he talked to himself, and once he made a sound, half sob, half bitter laugh, without his face changing one line. Drawing a deep breath, Flynn looked around the room at the Aes Sedai, at Amis. When he caught sight of Min, he gave a start, and his leathery face reddened. Hastily, he rearranged the sheet to cover Rand to his neck, leaving only the old wound and the new exposed. "I hope nobody minds if I talk," he said, beginning to move calloused hands above Rand's side. "Talking seems to help a mite." He squinted, focusing on the injuries, and his fingers writhed slowly. Very much as though he was weaving threads, Min realized. His tone was almost absent, only part of his mind on the words. "It was healing made me go to the Black Tower, you might say. I was a soldier till I took a lance in my thigh. Couldn't grip a saddle proper after that or even walk far. That was the 15th wound I took in near 40 years in the Queen's Guards. 15 that counted anyway. It don't if you can walk or ride after. I seen a lot of friends die in them 40 years. So I went, and the Mahale taught me healing, and other things. A rough sort of healing. I was healed by an Aes Sedai once, nigh on 30 years back now, and this hurts compared to that. Works as well, though. Then one day Dashiva here, Ashamanda Shiva says he wonders why it's all the same, no matter if a man's got a broke leg or a cold. And we got to talking, and, well, he's got no feel for it himself, but me seems I got the knack, you might
Hell
say,
yeah.
the talent.
Give me 1 sec. I'll
So
be right
I
back.
started thinking, what if I... There. Best I can do. The Shiva grunted as Flynn abruptly sat back on his heels and wiped the back of his hand across his forehead. Sweat beaded on his face, the first time men had seen an Ashaman perspire. The slash in Rand's side was not gone, yet it seemed a little smaller, less red and angry. He still slept, but his face seemed less pale. Samitsu darted past Narishma so quickly he had no chance to intervene. "What did you do?" she demanded, laying fingers on Rand's forehead. Whatever she found with the power, her eyebrows climbed halfway to her hair, and her tone leaped from imperious to incredulous. "What did you do?" Flynn shrugged his shoulders regretfully. "Not much. I couldn't really touch what's wrong. I sort of sealed them away from him for a time, anyhow. It won't last. They're fighting each other now. Maybe they'll kill off each other while he heals himself the rest of the way." Sighing, he shook his head. "On the other hand, I can't say that they won't kill him, but I think he has a better chance than he did." Dashiva nodded self-importantly. "Yes, he has a chance now." You would have thought he had done the healing himself. To Flynn's evident surprise, Samitsu rounded the bed to help him rise. "You will tell me what you did," she said, regal tone at strong odds with the way her quick fingers straightened the old man's collar and smoothed his lapels. "If only there was some way you could show me, but you will describe it.
I don't know about
You
a hot
must.
dab. You take a
I will
dab
give
too
you all
hot,
the
that's
gold
gonna
I
suck.
possess, bear your child, whatever you wish, but you will tell me all that you can." Apparently not sure herself whether she was commanding or begging, she led a very bemused Flynn over by the windows. He opened his mouth more than once, but she was too busy trying to make him talk to see it. Not caring what anyone thought, Min climbed onto the bed and lay so she could tuck Rand's head under her chin and wrap her arms around him. A chance. Furtively, she studied the three people gathered around the bed, Kadswain in her chair, Amis standing opposite, Dashiva leaning against one of the square bedposts at the foot, all with unreadable auras and images dancing around them, all with their eyes intent on Rand. No doubt he saw some disaster for the Aiel if Rand died, and Dashiva, the only one with any expression, a dark yet worried scowl, disaster for the other man, and Kadswain, who was not only known to Bera and Kiruna, but made them jump like girls for all their oaths to Rand. Kadswain, who would not hurt Rand any more than she had to. Kadswain's gaze met Min's for a moment, and Min shivered. Somehow she would protect him while he could not protect himself, from Amis and Dashiva and Kadswain. Somehow. Unconsciously, she began to hum a lullaby, rocking Rand gently. Somehow.
Chapter 37. A Note from the Palace. The day after the Festival of Birds dawned to strong winds off the Sea of Storms that actually cut the heat in Ebudar. A sky without a cloud, and the red gold dome of the sun on the horizon, gave promises for once the wind died, though. Matt hurried down through the Tarasan Palace with his green coat undone and his shirt only half laced in anticipation. He did not quite jump at every sound, but he did give a start, considerably more wide-eyed than he liked whenever one of the serving women passed, swishing her petticoats and smiling at him. Every last one of them smiled, in a particularly knowing way. It was all he could do not to run. At the last, he slowed, easing onto the shaded walk bordering the stable yard almost on tiptoe. Between the fluted columns of the walk, yellowish reedy plants in big red pottery bowls, and vines with wide red-striped leaves dangling from metal baskets on chains, formed a thin screen. Unconsciously, he tugged his hat lower to obscure his face.
Yeah.
His hands ran along
This
his
book's
spear,
almost done.
and Ashandarai,
We got
Agita called
4
it,
more hours left on it.
unthinkingly
So
fingering the
next couple of
hat
days,
as if he might need to
it'll
defend
be done.
himself.
Have to start
The
the
dice
next
tumbled
book in the
inside his head
series.
fiercely, yet that had
Or
nothing to do with his uneasiness.
before we get to the
The
next
source
book
of
in the
that
series, just
was Tyler.
give everyone a break and
6
pick it
clothed
up.
coaches
Like,
with the green anchor and sword of House
excuse me,
Mitsubar lacquered on
do
the
a different
doors already
book.
waited in line before the
Just
tall
a
arched
short
outer
book,
gates with teams hitched
and
and
then get
liveried
back to the
drivers
next book
mounted.
in the series.
He could see Nalisian
That's how
nodding
we
in a yellow
decided.
striped coat on the far side of them, and
Have a
Vannon's
time
had
to do
slumped
that,
atop
or
an upended
if I
barrel
do
not
do
far
it,
from the
I'll
stable
what book to
doors,
do.
apparently asleep. Most of the other Red Arms were squatting patiently on the stable yard flagstones, a few tossed dice in the shadow of the huge white stables. Elaine stood
So
between
the
Matt
next
and the
book in the
coaches, just the other
let's
side
see
of the
how
screen
long
of
that one
flames.
is.
Rihanna Corley was with her, and close by, 7 more of the women who were at that peculiar meeting he had burst into the evening before. Rihanna was the only one not wearing the red belt of a wise woman. He had half expected them not to appear this morning. They had the features of women used to ordering their own lives and others, and most had at least a bit of gray in their hair. Yet they watched fresh-faced Elaine with an air of expectation, seemingly on their toes, as though ready to jump at her command.
Oh yeah, the next book's not
The whole
too
lot
long.
caught less than
It's
half his attention, though.
23
None of them was the
hours
woman
and
who had him
25
ready to
minutes.
jump out of his skin. Tylen made him feel, well, helpless was the only word that seemed to fit, however ridiculous it seemed. "We do not need them, Mistress Corley," Elaine said. The daughter air sounded like a woman patting a child on the head. "I've told them to remain here until we return. We will attract less attention, especially across the river, without anyone recognizably Aes Sedai." Her notion of what to wear visiting the office part of the city without attracting attention was a wide green hat with green-dyed plumes, a light dust cloak of green linen, worked
I
in
could do
golden
that.
scrolls hanging down her
After
back,
this one, I'll play
and a
Doom.
high-necked green silk riding dress with gold embroidery climbing the divided skirts and thickly emphasizing the
I have
oval
that book, so
that exposed half her bosom. She even wore one of those necklaces for a marriage night.
Doom.
That broad band of woven gold would make every thief's hand in the Rahad itch. She carried no weapon beyond a small belt knife. But as to that, what weapon did a woman who could channel need? Of course, every one of those red belts had a curved dagger tucked beneath it. So did Rihanna's belt of plain wool. Rihanna removed a large blue straw hat, frowned at it, then put it back on and retied the ribbons. Elaine's tone did not seem to be what was bothering her. She put on a diffident smile with the hat and a timid tone. "But why does Meralila Sedai think we are lying, Elaine Sedai?" "They all do," one of the red belts said breathlessly. All of them wore Ebudari dresses in silver colors with narrow plunging necklines and skirts sewn up on one side to expose layered petticoats, but only this one, bone lean and with more white than black in her long hair, had the olive skin and dark eyes of an Ebudari. "Saritha Sedai called me liar to my face about our numbers, about—" She cut off short at a frown and a "be quiet, Tamarla" from Rihanna. Mistress Corley might be ready to curtsy and simper for a child if the child was Aes Sedai, but she kept a tight rein on her companions. Matt frowned up at the windows overlooking the stable yard, those he could see from where he stood. Elaborate white wrought iron screens covered some, white wooden screens of intricately carved piercework others. Not likely Tylen was up there. Not likely she would appear in the stable yard. He had been very careful not to wake her getting dressed. Besides, she would not try anything here. At least, he did not think she would. Then again, was anything past the woman who had had a half a dozen serving women seize him in the halls last night and drag him into her apartments? The bloody woman treated him like a toy. He was not going to put up with it anymore. He was not. Light, who was he trying to fool? If they did not grab this bull of the winds and get out of Ebudar, Tylen would be pinching his bottom and calling him a pigeon again tonight. "It's your ages, Rihanna." Elaine did not exactly sound hesitant. She never did that. But her tone became very careful. "It is considered rude among Aes Sedai to speak of age, but... Rihanna, Apparently, no Aes Sedai since the breaking has lived as long as any of you in the knitting circle claim. That was the odd name these kin gave their ruling council. In your own case, not by over 100 years. The Red Belts gasped, going wide-eyed. A slender brown-eyed woman with pale honey hair gave a nervous giggle and instantly covered her mouth at Rihanna's whip-quick, "Famella." "That can't be possible," Rihanna said faintly to Elaine. "Surely Aes Sedai must—" "Good morning," said, stepping past the screen of plants. The whole discussion was idiotic. Everyone knew Aes Sedai lived longer than anybody else. Instead of wasting time, they should be on their way to the Rahad. "Where are Tom and Julian? And Nynaeve?" "She had to have come back last night, or Elaine would have been in the Swivet." "Blood and ashes, I don't see Brigitte either. We need to be on our way, Elaine, not standing around. Is Avienda coming?" She frowned at him slightly, with just a flicker of her eyes toward Rihanna, and he knew she was deciding what performance to give him. Wide-eyed innocence might damage her standing with these women as much as flashing her dimple at him would. Elaine always expected that dimple to work where all else failed. Her chin rose slightly. "Tom and Julian are helping Avienda and Brigitte watch Carden's palace." It was to be the daughter heir in near full bloom. Not the whole flowering, since she surely knew how he would react to that, but a voice full of certainty, cool blue eyes demanding, and that pretty face chill, if not exactly frozen with arrogance. Was there any woman in the world who was just one person? "Nynaeve will be down shortly, I am sure. There is no reason for you to come, you know. Nalisian and your soldiers are a more than adequate bodyguard. You could enjoy yourself right here in the palace until we return." "Carradine!" he cried. "Elaine, we aren't staying in Ebudar to settle Jake and Carradine. We are getting the bowl. Then you or Nynaeve is going to make a gateway, and we are leaving. Is that clear? And I am going with you to the Rahad." Enjoy himself. The light only knew what Tynan would get up to if he remained in the palace all day. The very thought made him want to laugh hysterically. Icy stares stabbed at him from the wise woman. Stout Sameko pursed her lips angrily, and Melora, a plump Damani in her middle years, whose bosom he had enjoyed eyeing yesterday, planted fists on hips with a face like a thunderhead. They should have known from yesterday that he was not intimidated by Aes Sedai, yet even Rihanna gave him such a scowl he half thought she might try to box his ears. Apparently, if they were going to fall all over themselves around Aes Sedai, then everybody else had to as well. Elaine struggled with herself visibly, her lips compressed, but one thing he had to give her. She was too smart to go on with what obviously would not work. On the other hand, she was snooty to the bone, however she tried. And the other women were watching. "Matt, you know we cannot leave until we have used the bowl." That haughty chin remained high, and her tone was at best halfway between explaining and telling. "It might require days for us to be sure of how to use it, perhaps even half a week or more. And we might as well finish Carradine if we can in that time." Such a crackle entered her voice on the White Cloak's name that you might have thought she bore the man a personal grudge. But something else leaped out and clamped a fist on his thoughts. "Half a week!" Feeling strangled, he put a finger behind the scarf knotted around his neck and tugged to ease it. Tylan had used that length of black silk to tie his hands last night before he knew what she was doing. "Half a week? Or more?" Despite his best efforts, his voice became a touch frantic. "Elaine, surely you can use the bowl anywhere. It doesn't have to be here. Egwene must want you back as soon as possible. She can use a friend or two, I'll wager." By the last he had seen, she could use a few hundred. Maybe once he got these women back, Egwene would be ready to give up that nonsense about being Amerlin and let him take her to Rand along with Elaine and Nynaeve and Avienda. And what about Rand, Elaine? Caemlyn? The Lion Throne? Blood and ashes, you know you want to reach Caemlyn quick as you can so Rand can give you the Lion Throne. For some reason, her face grew darker almost by the word, and her eyes flashed. He would have said she was indignant, except, of course, that she had no cause. She opened her mouth angrily to argue as soon as he finished, and he set himself, ready to list her promises and to the pit of doom with what that did to her in the eyes of Rihanna and the rest. By their faces, they would have snubbed him short already in her place. Before anyone could say anything, though, a round graying woman in House Mitsubar livery was curtsying, first to Elaine, then to the women wearing red belts, and finally to him. Queen Tylan sends this Master Cawthon, Laren said, holding out a basket with a striped cloth over the contents and small red flowers woven around the handle. You did not breakfast, and you must maintain your strength. Matt's cheeks warmed. The woman merely looked at him, but she had seen considerably more of him than when she first showed him into Tylan's presence. Considerably more. She had brought supper on a tray last night, but he tried to hide under the silk bedsheet. He did not understand it. These women had him jumping about and blushing like a girl. He just could not understand. Are you sure you wouldn't rather remain here? Elaine asked. I'm sure Tylan would enjoy your company for breakfast. The Queen said she finds you wonderfully entertaining and courteously compliant, she added in a doubtful tone. Matt fled for the coaches with the basket in one hand and his Ashandarai in the other. Are all northern men so shy? Laren said. He risked a glance over his shoulder without stopping and heaved a sigh of relief. The serving woman was already gathering her skirts, turning to walk through the screen of plants, and Elaine was motioning Rihanna and the wise women into a circle close around her. Even so, he shivered. Women were going to be the death of him yet. Rounding the nearest coach, he nearly dropped the basket at the side of Beslin, seated on the coach step, sunlight gleaming along the narrow blade of his sword as he examined the edge. What are you doing here? Matt exclaimed. Beslin slid the sword into its sheath, a grin splitting his face. Coming with you to the Rahad. I suspect you'll find more fun for us. There had better be some fun, Elysian yawned into his hand. I didn't get very much sleep last night, and now you drag me off when there are sea folk women about. Bannon sat up on his barrel, looked around, found nothing moving, and settled himself back again with his eyes shut. There'll be...
All right, everyone. Gonna call into his life for tonight. I want to thank everyone for stopping by, and everyone keeps coming by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone. Y'all stay safe out there.